Welcome to the units 1 through 5 APUSH review. We are joined by the amazing cast of the cast. If we would like to introduce on in order of the names, it'll probably be easiest.
Okay. Hi, I'm Joe, and I'm here to help with the Unit 1 through 5 A push
Okay.
review.
I am Ira. I I'm here.
Me too!
Who are you? You can't just
Oh,
say
I'm
me.
Atlas. Hi, guys.
What's good, gang? I'm Eddie. I'm really tired, man.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
He's been up since 4.
All right. Okay. Starting.
We're gonna jump into it,
Okay.
guys.
Unit 1.
It's Cadillac.
Unit 1 starts in 1491, ends in 1607. The time period encompasses the state of Native American civilization prior to European contact up until establishment of the first successful English settlement, Jamestown. The key concepts are as follows. 1.1. As native populations migrated and settled across a vast expanse of North America over time, they developed distinct and increasingly complex societies by adapting to and transforming their diverse environments.
Word.
KC 1.2. Okay. KC 1.2. Contact among Europeans, Native Americans, and Africans resulted in the Columbian Exchange and significant social, cultural, and political changes on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. So to start, the earliest stuff that you need to know in ancient America, maize cultivation develops in Mesoamerica, that is Mexico and Central America, and it spreads along trade routes to both North and South America. Maize cultivation is important because it leads to economic development, sedentary life, irrigation, and social diversification. Um, and then for native cultures, native societies, like all other societies in the world, develop distinct cultures and identities based primarily on their environment as well as interactions with other native groups around them. And the comparative groups are often based on the geographic location of society, as you can see on this map.
Okay. First native culture area will be the Northeast. So the Native American groups are the Iroquois, the Wampanoag, the Powhatan, the Algonquin, and the Ottawa. The most important here being the Iroquois. In this area, most of these tribes were hunter gatherer and very much based in their agriculture. Um, when talking about the most important tribe you need to know, it's probably going to be the Iroquois Confederacy. This was a group of the Mohawk, the Oneida, the Onondaga, the Seneca, and the Tuscarora, who joined later. And they're all in present day New York. So it was a conglomerate of Native American tribes in the United States, but they're the United Native Americans. Yes. They had a very surprisingly democratic government, and it was very matrilineal based within the woman. And then their agriculture, they did a lot of with the corn and the squash, like the Three Sisters. And then they also ate deer, rabbit, and turkey. And then another fun, important fact: in order to um, relay information to one another, they had runners and ran across the entire span of the Confederacy, and it was these young boys, and they just ran across from tribe to tribe. But yeah, that's the Northeast. And then the Southeast, that's so fun. So these are the Cherokee, like the Northeast, they are hunter gatherer. The Cherokee, they were spread around the Georgia, the Carolinas, Virginia, and they were mostly built around rivers. And then within their social hierarchy and government, it was an even distribution of gender between male and female. They were also very big on farming, Three Sisters, nuts, potatoes, and peaches. And because their settlements were very close to the rivers, they also fished for their primary protein. But yes, that is the Southeast.
So then we have the Mississippian cultures. These are sometimes lumped in with the Southeast, but they have different. They do have like relatively different societies. So the Mississippian cultures were completely sedentary. They built extremely large mounds and built complex irrigation systems. The mounds were built primarily for to show like socioeconomic status. So like social classes, obviously like people of higher power would be higher on the mound, And then also higher up on the mounds would be used for like religious purposes for the Mississippians. They are among the most sophisticated of the North American Native Americans, especially prior to European settling. They participated in large trade networks that went all the way up to Canada down to Florida, which spread the culture of the Mississippians as well as the Algonquin language, which is all of these, the red, green, and blue are all types of, they're all like family groups within the Algonquin family group of languages. The largest city is Cahokia. It is also the largest city in North America, not including modern Mexico. They did die out before the Europeans got to America, likely due to climate change issues, but they were again one of the most complex.
Atlas.
Okay, so we've got the native cultures and the Great Basins and also the plains. They're technically two different things, but they're basically in the same-ish area. They were very nomadic people, so that means they moved around. They did not really settle in one place, so therefore they had portable shelters that they used. The most common one was teepees, especially in the Great Plains. And to make up for the fact that they could not, did not settle down permanently, they hunted and gathered whatever was around. When the Europeans eventually brought over horses, they definitely utilized those a lot because it made traveling much easier because they didn't have to completely like walk all the way. And it also made hunting bison, which is their like main food source, because when they moved around with their nomadic lifestyles, they pretty much just followed the bison as they moved around, so it made hunting them um very easy. So one of like the main tribes in this region would be the Sioux people, and they lived in the Great Plains, and they were actually a confederation of tribes. So they were like a big old group of them. They kind of just were technically different tribes, but they were connected together, kind of like allied, whatever. So included in the confederation include the Lakota, the Dakota, and the Nakota tribes, and they all, like, once again, like their big thing was that they hunted the bison as they migrated, so they followed them around.
So then in the Southwest, there were Native American groups like the Pueblo, Navajo, and roaming bands of Apache. The Navajo and the Apache populations expanded in the Southwest, especially when the Europeans began to push them out of tribal lands. So the major group that was there the entire time was the Pueblo. They were largely sedentary. They developed complex irrigation systems to farm the Three Sisters crops. The Pueblo were one of the oldest cultures in the region. They farmed the Three Sisters crops, and they kept some of their hunting and gathering tradition, but it was a lot. It was mostly reliant on agriculture. They developed systems for pottery and basket making, and their dwellings were made. Or there were complexes of clay and stone with multiple different rooms in them. So obviously these doors and stuff would be modern implementations, but like up here with no doors but large, square clay dwellings are what they lived in.
What's up, people?
Okay.
Okay.
No,
Okay. What's up, my people? All right. All right. All right. So next up, we got the cultures. So the California. So the main thing you really need to know is that they were nomadic. Using like hunting, fishing, and gathering practices. Especially most of them like the hoopa, using or having salmon as like a really central part of their diet from fishing. And then they were mostly organized into clans, which was really helpful in advancing their social structure and specifically forming decisions when going hunting or raiding plans across the California region. And then like about the hoopa, um, guess like a bunch of like other native tribes, they use basket weaving and of course wood carving techniques for like their totems and baskets. And yeah, that's really it. So yeah.
okay, so we've got the native cultures in the Northwest. They all lived pretty much on the coast. So they fished a lot, um, used the marine resources that they had access to, which, included fish and more fish, lots of fish. They had permanent settlements because the area was very good for just like settling down because, they had very plentiful resources in the environment there, so they set up villages that they lived in permanently, and because of this, they also developed very structured village culture, like social hierarchies were very important to these tribes. So they were like these tribes were most known for like the classic like totem pole, and the totem poles are very representative of this um like hierarchical structure that they had developed. And one example of this is the Tlingit tribe in the Northwest, and they were a matrilineal society, which means their society followed um the mother's side and whatever. And they had the raven and eagle moiety, and basically in a lot of these tribes they had moieties, which was basically two groups in the tribe. So that you would have the tribe is united as one, but they were kind of sort of still split up. It was basically like the two major families within the tribe. So you would have like, for example, this one they had the raven moiety and the eagle moiety, and for example, like one would they'd be in the same tribe, but they would like marry each other. So, they were still kind of like split up, but still one. They didn't actually farm much because they didn't really have to, because, like I said, the region was already very abundant with stuff that they could already use. They hunted and gathered and fished. And since they didn't farm, they instead did a lot of woodworking, which um, resulted in the totem poles from before. Very intricate, very detailed. That's it.
Yeah. Just about the California and Northwest both. Also, lots of the villages and clans would often lay claim to a specific natural resource, and they developed like especially complex. Where am I? Oh, my fault. Okay, they developed especially complex trade relationships with each other.
Okay. Uh, so next up we got the Aztec Empire, which was basically empire located in Mesoamerica, and it was very advanced, very sedentary empire, and it controlled a very vast territory, basically almost all of Central America and most of Mexico too, modern day Mexico. And its hierarchy, it was very decentralized. It was organized through nobles, priests, warriors, and commoners, and then it was put into some sort of like food system sort of civilization. And then they practice polytheism, and also had religious practices such as human sacrifice, which is like one of the most well known sacrifices used within their culture. And, they're also known for inventing and having innovations in mathematics, with like the Aztec calendar and such, and like their innovations in like time recording and all that. Eventually, they were conquered by Hernán Cortés in 1521, where entire city was destroyed. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
And then them being decentralized comes from the Aztecs were very based in like warrior culture, so they would conquer new places and establish tributary relationships, which is important later. But a lot of the people that they conquered outside of Tenochtitlan and their like specific land were not exactly happy with the tributary relationships, because also it was them who were being used in the human sacrifice.
Yeah, they were very military based empire. Yeah. All right. So next up, we have the other side, which Incan Empire, which it's basically like almost all or very much along the western coast of South America, like the South American continent. Taking up places in like modern day Chile, in those areas. And it was advanced like the Aztecs, However, it was like more centralized, and it was very well known for its really complex road system, which also contributed to its overall concept of centralization. Its economy was largely based on agriculture, using like many terrace farming techniques, and it allowed it so they were able to grow different crops in like different areas, since or like different climates, since that overall region has like very distinct temper changes, and it was highly organized, and it was under one central ruler, who was said to have divine and absolute power and rule over the rest of the people. And it was eventually conquered by Francisco Pizarro in 1532.
All right, so going back, kind of the same deal with Europe. So, uh, like long before time period, Europe is basically like irrelevant on the world stage. After the fall of the Roman Empire, they are like this entire seat of power in the world is concentrated in China and India, and Europe is very decentralized. The closest thing that you have to a power in Europe is the Byzantines, and they are down here, not really in Western Europe as we think of it today. So in 1453, the Ottomans take over Constantinople right here. And that means, along with the other two gunpowder empires, the Safavids and the Mughals, the Silk Roads are now very much under the control and have to go through a lot of taxes. So now Europeans, using these overland trade routes, have to pay extremely high taxes for spices, as well as other luxury goods from China and India. But spices are their main one. So obviously, a lot of rich people are very upset that they do not have their spice anymore. So as you can see, the Silk Roads go directly through these empires, right through Constantinople. So Spain also kind of becomes the most powerful monarchy in all of Europe. This is because there's Al-Andalus, which is Muslim Spain in the south of the Iberian Peninsula, and the Reconquista is going on for a few hundred years before this. But kind of a second wave of it happens when Castile and Aragon unite to oust the Muslim population of Al-Andalus out of Iberia. At the same time, Portugal is developing new navigational technologies. Um, so I mean across wider Europe as well, but Portugal is kind of the center of this. So there's new boat designs. The Caravel, a smaller ship that is more navigable for rivers, and the Carack, which is a larger warship that was used for bigger trade around Africa. There's new navigational technology. So there's magnetic compass, which obviously is for directions. Then the astrolabe and sextant are two navigational technologies that use the stars to figure out where the ship is specifically. Which all of this making travel more accurate also makes it faster because they spend less time going off track. In sailing, they make the lateen sails, which are these triangular sails that are able to catch the wind from any direction, so they can always be making some progress correctly. And then Prince Henry the Navigator, he establishes navigation schools in Portugal that make navigation a bigger focus of the Europeans. So Portugal, having lost their access to spice, they decide to instead just go around, go around the Mediterranean. So they start by moving down south towards the west coast of Africa, where they find a lot of gold, and they start establishing a trading post empire. And then Bartholomew Diaz, he goes all the way to the bottom of Africa, and then Vasco da Gama goes all the way down around it to India. So after that, they begin to dominate the Indian Ocean trade slowly and expand their trading post empire across it. So they have trading posts all across the coast of Africa and in India. Now Spain goes around even more. They can't use the same pathway that Portugal does, because one, Portugal doesn't want them to and is going to inhibit their ability to use it. But also they kind of want a faster route because they don't really know if there is one or there isn't. Now Christopher Columbus, he's really bad at math. He thinks that he can go all the way around the entire world somehow, and without landing, and just on one ship of rations get all the way around. Um, this was because he thought the world was a lot smaller than it really was. The Greeks had actually figured out how big the world was to like a very small margin of error. He just didn't trust them. Now he does actually, luckily run into a couple big rocks. And he finds a much more important thing for Spain than the new route to India. So he makes multiple return voyages and spreads the word of the New World in Europe, and many countries will send explorers to claim new lands.
So After Columbus kind of finds the United States, we kind of jump into the Columbian Exchange, and this is categorized as the transfer of plants, animals, cultural ideas, disease, metals, technology, and humans. And that does mean slaves, unfortunately. So, from the New
Europe.
World, Europe, from Europe to the New World, we've got horses. That's your biggest example of domesticated animals. Disease like smallpox that will inevitably kill them all, grains and other crops, and sugar. And then from the New World to Europe, we find new crops like I'd say the Three Sisters, rubber ish, and then new metals. Well, not new metals, an abundance of metals,
Yeah.
silver. And then the impacts from this. Um, like I said, diseases were one of the bigger things and more monumental things spread to the New World. So this is called the Great Dying, very aptly named, and it kills about 90% of the Native America. Because of the new crops and the new livestock transfer from the New World to Europe, the European lifespan increases because they're not just eating the same old stuff time and time again. Now they have extra land to expand on their plantation economy. This is the abundance of tobacco and sugar. And then we see the transatlantic slave trade come about, seeing as the Columbian Exchange is the exchange of also humans. So Native American laborers eventually do switch to enslaved Africans. And then because of all this new everything that Europe isn't taking, we switch from a feudal system to a mercantilist um, system, which is proto capitalism. It's basically where you want to export as much as possible.
Yeah, and then minimize imports. Yeah, I think that's basically yeah. So there's a lot of lots and lots and lots of explorers to America. This is a list of a lot of important ones. So obviously you have Columbus, Giovanni Caboto. He sails for England and he claims Newfoundland, which is this little rock right up here. Um, then there's Amerigo Vespucci. He sails for Portugal and goes down to Brazil. He's a cartographer and the namesake of America. Cortez and Pizarro, well, we talked about and we'll talk about more. Magellan, he is from Portugal and he circumnavigates the world through the Strait of Magellan down here. Sir Francis Drake, he is a pirate. He does raiding along the Spanish Indies, down across South America, up and around, all the way back around, up to North California. He realizes he can't go back around, so he actually also just circumnavigates the world. He goes a little bit up to Alaska and then just goes back down around to get back up to England, and he brings lots and lots of riches for the English crown. They're also very surprised that he's alive still. They thought he was dead. Then you have Cartier and Verrazano. They're both French explorers. Well, they're explorers for France. They will travel along the St. Lawrence, and they claim New France, also ignoring England's claim to Newfoundland. And then Henry Hudson, he explores originally for the Dutch to go to New Amsterdam. He claims that and names Hudson River after him. Then while he's returning, he lands in England. They say, no, you're not going to work for them anymore. You're going to work for us now. So he goes up here and claims things in Canada, the Hudson Bay, obviously being here. And then eventually he's told to go across Canada and he disappears. No one knows what happened to him. The only big thing is that a lot of these explorers you'll notice do not have names that are representative of their countries. That's because most of them are Italians, but Italy is a bit busy being not Italy yet. So they're just kind of working for other countries. So obviously Columbus was Italian, probably, and then Caboto, Verrazano, I think Vespucci was. So lots and lots of Italians were actually in the New World, despite Italy not having any claim.
Okay. When looking at these different explorers and the different people coming to the Americas, there's three main reasons they come. And this is categorized as your God, gold, and glory. The three main demographics we see coming to the Americas are the Spanish, the French, the English, and the Dutch. So all from Europe. Spanish, they come to settle South America, and they come for all these. So they want, for God, they want to spread their religion, Christianity. They're also seeking wealth and seeking things that are they are able to sell, and they are also seeking, as they are kind of in like this top dog position. They're seeking their gratification of having this land. Um, for the French, they're kind of settling in North America slash Canada, and they are looking to settle there for gold, and they are looking to trade for with the Native American populations. The English, obviously, they settle in North, and they came here for both. I'd say they'd come for all three. So they, Christianity, they come to colonize the Native Americans, and they colonize the land. So having that outlet of revenue is their gold. They're also really big on intermarriage. A little more on that later. And then the Dutch, they're our most docile group of people. They're settling in New Netherlands in hopes of making bank. Sorry for my informal language. They're here for gold and their gold. So they're along with the French, they're trading.
Yeah.
Right. Uh, yeah. So, um, as they mentioned in the last slide, the main reasons that like some Europeans came for, or at least like traveled to the Americas or New World, was for gold, and glory. And with especially Hernan Cortez, this is where that comes in. So, of course, he's known for conquering the Aztec Empire, which is now modern day Mexico and some parts of like Central America. And then his main motivation for conquering the Aztecs was Christianity, whereas then he wanted to convert them. And then at some point, he even kind of made it rational or reasonable through saying that they would be saved by having the Native Americans work for him, or as seen through the commandas. Yeah, and then especially with European contact, of course, this brings a bunch of disease both to and from Europe, especially. So this leads to a lot of death in the European, well, I mean Native American population in that area. Yeah.
Yeah. The other things, he did get a gift of gold at one point from Tenochtitlan, so that was also a motivation while he was going there. And then, as we were talking about the tributary relationships earlier, he actually received a lot of help from Native American groups outside of Tenochtitlan as the major city. And they were all very upset with the Aztecs already, and they actually helped him enter the city and take it over.
Right. So yeah. So one of the next major conquistadors is Francisco Pizarro, who, of course, conquered the Inca Empire, which is basically in areas of modern day Peru. So his basic concept was that the more land you would cover, or basically the Inca Empire, was a very vast empire, and basically took up almost all of the entire western coast or area along South America. So of course, getting more land or claiming more land would mean that she would have more power, which is just as the Incas had done. So, as a result of that, because he got more land, he got more power. You see where I'm going? Yeah. So, especially with this, like with the Aztec Empire and Hernan Cortez, with European contact came diseases, which was again a very big factor in the Amerindians' death and their overall health. As you know, just like for the Aztecs, say with me, yeah, it decreased the population.
What? They got smallpox? I thought they got like more life.
To give or take.
Yeah.
Okay, my guy Ferdinand Magellan. So he was the first to circumnavigate the globe. That's so awesome. And that means he went around the globe. From this, he found the strait. Well, he didn't. He found this thing and he named it the Strait of Magellan. And so this very much allowed for better trade and more connections for him and his country. Great, awesome. So while he's circumnavigating the globe, he kind of runs into this conglomerate of islands. Let's call this the Philippines. Um, I hate to break it to you guys, but he didn't actually fully circumnavigate the globe. He kind of dies. So, in him coming to the Philippines, he's kind of like, "Yo, what's up?" And they kind of start fighting him. And in this, he full on dies and kicks the bucket. So someone else has to circumnavigate the. But because he was the lead in this voyage, he is credited for fully circumnavigating the globe first. Isn't that so awesome? But he's also great for the Strait of Magellan, and that's all.
Mhm. All right. So we got the first New World debates of who gets what. This is so the main example here, other than just the all of Europe like trying to claim a bunch of land, is the Treaty of Tordesillas. So there's debates between mainly Spain and Portugal about like who should get mainly South America. Obviously, Spain owns everywhere from like I mean later will own everything from like up here in Oregon down to like obviously like Argentina, Chile. Um, but Brazil, or not, sorry, Portugal also wants land in the New World, like in Brazil specifically. So to settle the debates, they're both Catholic nations, so they both go to the Pope. They're like, "Hey, Pope, what should we do here?" And the Pope decides we're going to split the world in two, right along the line of demarcation. Um, and that basically says that everything over here except Spain itself is going to be Portugal's, and everything over here past that boundary is going to be Spain's. They didn't know how much land was over here really yet, but they knew it was going to be a lot, so that they thought it was kind of fair. And then later they added this line over here um, to kind of give the other side of that. Now the issue, this everybody ignored this, literally everybody. Any non-Catholic nation not happy with this. They don't care what the Pope says. They're not Catholics. France was Catholic. They also didn't really care because they didn't get any land here, so they're obviously not very happy with this. Spain and Portugal don't even honor this. Brazil goes much further into the Amazon than this line, and Spain was the one who got the Philippines in the end, and that is very clearly on the Portuguese side. Literally nobody cares about the Treaty of Tordesillas, but they did try, and I guess that counts for something. So yeah, other than that, there's just general competition about land claims. So many Europeans are trying to like look for ways to make themselves look more powerful. Because this is the one kind of colonization is try to get as much land on the map as possible in your color. That's the general idea. Um, so that would be why you have like France up in Canada, because Canada is a lot of land to conquer, even though it's not really super economically viable other than fur trade.
Okay,
Atlas.
so we got systems of labor in America. So given that all these Europeans are going over to the New World, especially Spain, they want to make as much money as they can. And what's a great way to cut cut costs for making money? Cut the costs that labor takes. So for this, they had a couple different systems that they set up to try to pretty much maximize, like it's kind of like excuse the way that they liked to exploit non-European labor. So first up, we have the encomienda system, which is the first labor system that they thought of when they were like, so basically they were like, hey, let's take all these Native Americans and make them do our work for us so we don't have to pay them. We can make as much money as we can. So they did that. Not great, but they used them to farm for agriculture and whatever. So they made a bunch of money off of that. And then also for mining, because they, of course, why would they want to ever do the mining themselves? Um, but yeah. So then after that, there was the repartimento system.
Repartimiento.
That system. And it replaced the encomienda system because obviously there were some people that were like, hey guys, maybe we shouldn't really be using this kind of system because this is kind of like mean. Because it was. So they came up with a system that replaced it for a little bit because they're like, okay, let's see how this works. Maybe like be a little more less cruel. Um, and the only real difference with that one was that 25 of the native population in the village had to be free, opposed to, being enslaved to them. It's like a little better, but like it's still not great, obviously. And they again still use them for agriculture and mining because that's a great way for them to make money. And then after that came the Ascento system, which basically was people got mad. They were like, hey, maybe let's not use Native Americans as slaves. So they were like, oh, okay, let's just use the people from Africa as slaves instead. So that's where that system came from, and instead they used slaves that they got from the transatlantic slave trade and brought those over instead. Again, for agriculture and mining, because that's what they
Yeah.
made money off of.
And just to say, the major reason for the switch was not because they thought to be nice to the Native Americans. It's because the Native Americans had died in the Great Dying for the most part,
That too.
and
That too.
they knew how to run away a lot better since they knew the land.
Yeah.
The Africans who were brought over were unfamiliar with the type of land in many ways, and also obviously just weren't there already, so they did not know
Yeah.
where they were gonna go.
They have the upper hand.
Yeah.
Period.
Yes. And then after that, we have the caste system, which is from the Spanish, and it was the system that they had that kind of like for them justified using all of the slave labor because it put the Native Americans and the Africans all the way at the bottom. So basically, it was whoever in society, had the most rights, etc., etc. So at the very bottom, we have the Africans and the Native Americans, and then from there up, it goes basically off of um, were you fully Spanish and were you born there? So the going up, we have the mulattoes, which is they're mixed from of both um, African and European, and they were born in the New World. The mestizo class was that they were European and Native American mixed. They were also still born in the New World. And the Creoles or the Gorillas, they were white, but they were born in the New World. So they were a little bit below the Peninsulares, who were like true, like fully white Europeans that were born in Spain
Mm.
Yeah.
I will say
at the top.
probably the only most important thing to know about this. Between the criollos, the mestizos, and the mulattoes, there was a degree of like social mobility in that if you somehow became a highly wealthy mestizo or mulatto, you could be respected as a criollo. But it's still relatively hard to move between the ranks. Really, the most common one was a rich mestizo families would be respected and kind of on the same level as criollos. But for the most part, it was in this very stratified version of like hierarchy.
All right. So, of course, with the arrival of social hierarchies, there's always native resistance. So, there were two big, really major events or rebellions that happened that were, an example of native resistance. So, okay, so the first of these is the Pueblo Revolt, right? So, also known as Pope's Rebellion. And it was basically where, like, the Pueblo people, rebelled against the Spanish colonial authority. And it was successful for about, like, 12 years. They killed hundreds of Europeans. Then, as a result, the Spanish were like, whoa, we kind of got to cool it down on these guys, muchachos. So, like, yeah, they had to be less strict with the Native Americans. And that kind of led to the development of, like, a protector complex. Or, like, of the natives in different regions of New Spain. Or, like, they believed that, they were supposed to protect the natives. And then there was also the Taino Rebellion of 1511 in Puerto Rico. So the basic idea of it is that it was basically an uprising of the Taino people, or like the Native Americans in Puerto Rico, which led to, you know, an uprising against their European overlords there. That's like the main thing you gotta know. But like, yeah. Just two big examples of resistance. Good for an SAQ.
Just a note, for the Pueblo Revolt, it is not in time period. It's just a good revolt for showing the continuity of the resistance, but we will mention it again in two. Also, not only was there a Pacific complex, but there was like also an official like role within the government as a like ambassador to the Native Americans. Obviously, it wasn't perfect, but it was a little bit nicer than like what the English were doing.
Yeah.
So then there's the second round in New World debates is the treatment of non-Europeans. The biggest one being the Valladolid debates. So there's two major people within the debates. There's Juan de Sepulveda y Bartolomé de las Casas. So Sepulveda, he argues that Native Americans were pre-societal, they were basically barbaric, they required Spanish rule in civilizing, and that their poor treatment was okay. That'd be the encomienda system. This was also kind of pushed for the idea of the curse of Ham from the Bible, especially when, in regards to the use of African slavery later, which was I believe, a story that was like one of the sons of Noah, Ham, was cursed to be a servant of God, and he had like a mark put on him, but the Bible didn't specify what the mark was. So a lot of Europeans were like, "Oh, if you have a different skin color, that must be what the mark is." Obviously, this is just a very racist. Like it's just a way to use the Bible to promote the racism and the use of non-Europeans for free labor. And then there's Bartolome de las Casas. He argues that the Native Americans had society, they had complex society, they were real people too, and their mistreatment was unjust. And he wrote against the encomienda system. We love Las Casas. He obviously does not win. They continue to be mean to the Native Americans, unfortunately. But you know what? He's doing his best, and that's what's important. So then, starting with Unit 2. Unit 2 starts in 1607, ends in 1754. This is the establishment of Jamestown as the first successful English colony up until the start of the French and Indian War or the 7 Years' War. The key concepts are as follows. 2.1. Europeans developed a variety of colonization and migration patterns influenced by different imperial goals, cultures, and the varied North American environments where they settled. And they competed with each other and American Indians for resources. The British colonies participated, 2.2. The British colonies participated in political, social, cultural, and economic exchanges with Great Britain that encouraged both stronger bonds with Britain and resistance to Britain's control. And then 2.3, the increasing political, economic, and cultural exchanges within the Atlantic world had a profound impact on the development of colonial societies in North America.
So we have the different imperial goals of the different European countries that are going over the New World, trying to do whatever. This has kind of already gone over mostly because we have like the main things, obviously, gold, God, and glory. So basically, these nations, which would be Spain, France, the Dutch, and the English, they had their separate things, though there was a lot of overlapping because obviously it was just those three main factors that each of them were able to fall under, but they were a little different from each. Spain, obviously all three, they definitely wanted to make money so they could, have their standing as like a big power, because when you have more money than the other nations, you're more powerful than the other nations. God, because they were definitely like, we need to spread Christianity. So that showed up in them. What is it? I don't know. Trying to spread the religion to all the people that were in the New World. And then also glory, because I guess that kind of comes with the other two, inherently. French, they're pretty much the same thing. They were a little less harsh with the whole religion thing. But then again, that's kind of how they all were, but it was like definitely a little less. The gold, obviously, they want to be making that money so they can have power. The Dutch, they were really in it for the money. So this kind of made them a little better than the other few at the time, because since they weren't so focused on spreading their religion and getting the native peoples in the New World to convert, and they were mostly just focused on trade, they were a lot less harsh towards those people, and as long as they could still get their money through their trade, they were pretty much just fine, and that showed up in things like the fur trade that they had in the north, in northern North America, where they even sometimes had like alliances and were pretty friendly with the native people there. And then we had the English. They were gold, God, and glory, but the way that they were different than the Spanish in these ways is they eventually started focusing more on like settlement and stuff, because if you were able to plant your roots in this new area, then you are able to permanently harvest, the resources and stuff like this from that area. So it's a little more long term. God, because they were obviously also spreading their religion, but then again, nobody was really as crazy with that as Spain was, because Spain was like pretty intense about that at the time. So yeah.
Yeah, also the god was more like reflexive. They were trying to get do that for themselves, less for the natives.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got the why were the tea drinkers here? You know, why were they coming over? So there's four major reasons. The first, social mobility. Europe, especially England, built on the idea of primogeniture. So only the first son was guaranteed the majority, like usually the majority, but sometimes just all of the land of the father was given to the oldest son who was still living. Now this obviously upset second and third sons, because well they want land too, and the New World has land, so a lot of them were like, okay, well we can just go to the New World if we're not going to get land. Second one is gold. The first initial colonies who go to the North America, they are looking for mineral gold. There's not really much mineral gold that's easy to find where they were landing, though. So eventually they go into tobacco plantations, which we'll get into. They also sought religious freedom. So there's the Catholic Protestant split already. And then as like that kind of went down into becoming the Anglican Church, as the Protestants kind of became an Anglican Church in England, obviously, the Puritans saw issues in the Anglican Church and they wanted to purify it. They were like, hey, we can fix the Anglican Church. They were literally like, I can fix her. The Separatists were like, no, we can't fix her. She's done. All right, we got to just get to the New World and make our own better Anglican Church. Um, so they obviously wanted to go off to America, and they're now known as the Pilgrims. Finally, there's these living conditions in England were just getting really bad as it was experiencing a lot of population growth, and the enclosure movement was taking a lot of land from poorer farmers and giving it to richer landowners. So now poorer farmers are out of lands and jobs, or just making less money, and a lot of people who are now like kind of being born into England are also finding themselves deprived of opportunity and jobs. Um, and then we have French and the Dutch being here. Both held relatively congenial relations with the Native Americans. Only a few settlers were sent by each. So the French, they had the Coureurs de Bois, which were a group of French fur traders who intermarried with the Native Americans. They also had the Huguenots, which were French Protestants. Again, France is a Catholic nation primarily, so Huguenots were also religious refugees to North America. They intermarried and had the best relations with the Native Americans. They by far and away the best. They did slightly focus on conversion of Native Americans, but realistically, usually they were the ones assimilating. But Quebec was their major city, and it did have a little bit of conversion of Native Americans in the region. The Dutch, they were also very congenial with the natives, not because they were trying to be, but more because they just were like, okay, I guess we can trade with you, and it's probably better to not massacre you. But they did do that a couple of times, so they are worse than the French, unfortunately. They were largely cosmopolitan, and their major city was New Amsterdam and New Netherlands. New Netherlands is just New York, New Amsterdam, New York City. And they were, again, extremely cosmopolitan. Some accounts say that you could hear 12 languages being spoken on the streets of New Amsterdam at any given time. They were there for the fur trade and also established a trading post empire with main ports in New Amsterdam, also in the Caribbean a bit. Same with the French. They were also around the Caribbean and in French Guiana in South America. Dutch were also in South America, I think.
All right. So now for the Spanish, um, in their colonization technique, they started to switch from the inconvenience system to the Cinto de Negro system and the mission system. Okay, so what are these two systems? So the Cinto system, it's basically like the development of African slave labor, in which it was mostly used for agricultural reasons, like farming and like cultivation and like harvesting. like crops and everything, you know. And then these were usually given in like declared through like royal grants, and of course African slave labor. It was done for God, gold, and glory. You know, the big three G's. But it was mostly done for money. You know, in order to help build an economy for the Spanish, mostly in mercantilism, in which you want to try um, maximizing your exports and minimizing your imports. Right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then this had an especially large role in triangular trade, you know, or like the triangular slave trade, in which it was between Europe, the overall New World, and Africa. You know, in which Africa would give slaves to. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know the whole shebang. Like Africa, were they would get slaves from Africa, and those would be shipped to the New World. In the New World, they would farm materials and give it back to Europe, and then industrial goods would be sent to Africa and all that. Yeah,
We also have another diagram on the next slide for it.
yeah, yeah. And then the mission system, it's basically Native American assimilation. Or like they want to assimilate or convert the Native Americans into Catholicism. Or, of course, in the three G's, God. And then this eventually resulted or came through in Pope's rebellion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
Popes, the Native Americans in the Pueblo region, they had tried to be syncretic, so they wanted to have Christian beliefs, but as well as their like indigenous beliefs. Spain really did not like the indigenous part, and that's why they revolted. They did not. They wanted at least syncretism. They did want to hold on to some of their beliefs. Did I skip a slide? Okay. The earliest attempted English settlements. First, we have Newfoundland, like I talked about earlier, which is from Giovanni Caboto. There was a settlement that was attempted, but it just died out. There's nothing like special. It's just kind of a rock. There's not much to say about Newfoundland, but it does have a great name. I mean, it is Newfoundland. That's pretty good. Very creative from Caboto there. Then we have Roanoke. This is the fun one. It's the lost colony. It was settled in North Carolina, like the north part of the North Carolina border, or like obviously what would become North Carolina. It didn't exist yet. The first attempt was by Sir Richard Grenville. He was hired by his cousin Sir Walter Raleigh. He accuses a nearby native village of stealing a silver cup, or somebody does, and they end up just burning that village. Luckily, there happened to be Raleigh was like coming by with supply runs, so they all just kind of were like, "Oh, well, we have bad relations now. We should just get out of here." So then later they come back. They establish a second colony, and Raleigh leaves to try to get another resupply mission going. But he gets caught up in a war with Spain. He comes back to find the entire colony missing. There is a big mystery. Nobody knows where they went. All they found is a croatoan, which is written on a tree. They also found like a half like croa, I think, on a fence post. Um, there is the general idea. I think the common consensus, the most popular theory, is that they assimilated with native tribes, but there also might have been a native attack and they just got wiped out. There isn't really anything that says what happened. It's just I feel like the biggest evidence goes towards they just assimilated with a nearby tribe. Also, Sir Walter Raleigh was tried for treason because he was really bad at making colonies. He did just kind of kill two entire colonies. Well, his cousin was one, but he was really bad. So yeah, he was tried for treason under the king, which is kind of funny. It probably was for deeper reasons, but my headcanon is purely that he's just bad at making colonies. So then for the first successful one, we have Jamestown and then the Greater Virginia Colony. So we have the Virginia Company of London, also just known as the Virginia Company. They wanted to colonize the New World to make a lot of money. That's what they were in for. They were a joint stock company. Um, they send an expedition to Virginia. It makes landfall in the Chesapeake Bay. They call the fort Jamestown after King James the First. Um, so Jamestown as a whole, it was a expedition of rich men along with a lot of debtors and prisoners. They are looking for gold. A lot of the rich people don't want to plant food. They don't want to do any of that peasant labor. They want to look for gold. Now, unfortunately, that peasant labor is apparently very important. They all starve to death, like the majority of them. So eventually, John Smith comes by. He's on a resupply mission. He comes in and it's like places in shambles, not going great. So he gets everybody's act together. He says, "You don't work, you don't eat," and everybody starts working pretty fast after that. They do want to eat. So he gets them out of the starving time and kind of gets them into survival. Unfortunately, he blows his finger off in a gunpowder accident. He has to go back to England. So then later, we get John Rolfe. John Rolfe, he is a planter, just happens to be there, but he plants tobacco, and he actually finds a strain of tobacco that works extremely well in the Chesapeake climate, which makes Jamestown an actual success. By now, the Virginia Company is like well into bankruptcy, but the colony is in the green now. They are actually making money. So they eventually adopt the headright system, which allows families and just indentured servants to move to England, get people who bring them in a lot of land, and then as they expand, they end up suppressing the nearby Powhatan Indians who had been actually helping them prior, or like yeah, kind of early on into their expedition there. But there was always tensions in the region.
Okay, here we have Plymouth and then our pilgrims. To start, the pilgrims, okay, they didn't originally start where we see them. They come from an area which I might have forgotten. But the most important part where I'm going is the Mayflower and the Mayflower Compact. So basically, strange two groups of people with differing ideas. They're all boarding the Mayflower, I think, to get away from the Dutch because they didn't want to become Dutch. If I'm,
Yeah.
that's correct, right? Right. So they don't. They're like, ew, stinky Dutch people. I don't reciprocate that sentiment, but that's what they thought. So they boarded the Mayflower, and because of their differing ideas and rhetoric, they draft the Mayflower Compact, which is basically here's the rules, we're going to follow them, and we're. And this is very important for whenever you're writing anything for this class. This is one of the first accounts of self-governments in American history. So, um, we get to Plymouth, right? And we have this is William Bradford, and he writes of Plymouth Plantation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So basically, this is his accounts of all of the Pilgrim's journey from England to the Netherlands to the Mayflower into their settlements. Um, he's very much well known for his religious tolerance. He did not care really whatsoever religion you were, just that you were there. So this, along with that background, Plymouth was also a joint stock company, which is where they had a bunch of investors looking to make money off of them. It is also that they also probably would have kicked the bucket if they didn't have as good of relations as they have with the neighboring Native American tribes, as because of them they were able to figure out, hey, what kind of crops work in this environment, what is the lay of the land, and because of that they didn't die and they were pretty successful.
Look at that! Look at that! Look at them going off.
Oh god. And then we have the Massachusetts Bay Colony. So they're separate from Plymouth, but they become together later. Yeah. Um, the main thing I take away from Massachusetts is City on the Hill. They're also religious, by the way, if you couldn't tell from a lot of Christian charity. So this is John Winthrop, and he's governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony. And they're all pretty religious, I'd say. And so he gives this sermon, and this is like this is where we start seeing emotion being put into religion, and he's given his all. So, a model of Christian charity. So this is where Winthrop is saying that the Massachusetts Bay Colony needs to be as best as they can be. They need to put out as much as they can, because they are the blueprint and they are what the other colonies aspire to be. So they are very big on Calvinism, which is the opposite of predestination, if I'm not mistaken. And
I think they believed in predestination.
so, no, they believed in predestination. They're like, so God already said we're going to either heaven or hell. Let's do this as best as we can to make sure that like we are the top and what everyone wants to be and what everyone should aspire to be. Yes,
Yeah.
I know our religions.
Okay. Yeah, so the idea of predestination is based it says that your fate is already decided about where like whether you're going to heaven or hell. But if you lead a good life, that is indicative that you will be going to heaven. So it kind of still fits in that you should be a good person because if everything goes good for you and you're trying hard, that probably means you're going to heaven. But if you like try super hard and you get super unlucky constantly, yeah, you might be going to hell. Sorry, bud. Um, that's kind of how it went with them. So then Rhode Island and Connecticut, they both formed due to religious disagreements, especially with Massachusetts, and Plymouth, obviously. So Connecticut is created by Thomas Hooker and his followers. He's seeking greater religious freedom, and the major city in Connecticut, Hartford, and then Rhode Island is created by Roger Williams. He also wants greater religious freedoms, also wants people to be nicer to Native Americans. He actually pays them back for the land and lives with them for a time. He's really nice to them. What a great guy. He advocates for disestablishmentarianism, the idea that the church and the state should be two separate entities. They should not like work together, especially because that leads to a corruption in the church, is how he viewed it. He didn't want the church to become corrupt with worldly concerns of government. The major cities, I think he establishes Providence. Newport becomes also important as the port city for Rhode Island. Rhode Island is obviously very small, so there's like two cities in here. um, and then you have New Hampshire, Maine. Created by which one is that? That would be yeah, both of them. Okay, yeah, 1629. Captain John Mason and Sir Ferdinando. They create it up here. They get the charter for the land, and they split it along this river here, the Piscataqua River. Um, they are both part of Massachusetts at a point, but they do eventually kind of become separate colonies, especially because of Anne Hutchinson and her followers. Anne Hutchinson is from Massachusetts, I believe. She advocates that anybody in spiritual office, which is obviously Massachusetts a theocracy, so that means government, they should be a part of the elect. They should have undergone conversion experience and be like chosen by God to be in the spiritual office. She is forced out of Massachusetts because the spiritual office people are like, hey, you can't be saying that. That's kind of treasonous, and they don't want to lose power. She, I think, eventually dies in a Native American uprising in New York. However, her followers, they don't really follow her like out. They go the other way. They go up north to New Hampshire and Maine for the most part. Um, but yeah, she did kind of cause an exodus of people who kind of agreed like, hey, people should be a part of the elect if they're going to be in spiritual office.
So, in Pennsylvania, we've got the Quakers. I love the Quakers. They're the most awesomeness. They're so exciting, especially, and surprisingly, did not utilize slave labor. They cultivated the crops known as the breadbasket. So this is all of our grains. They were grains people. Um, big guy William Penn. William Penn names his for Pennsylvania. Um, he obviously was a Quaker, but he was very much he promoted a democratic government, right? And he was like, yeah, no, it's peace, love, and tolerance, guys. So I like to call him a hippie. He's basically
Okay.
a hippie. He took the Pennsylvania colony and he's like, guys, we want to promote peace and love and tolerance. And basically makes Pennsylvania one of the welcoming colonies for everyone, even Native Americans. And yeah, that's the biggest takeaway from Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
They're
very
chill like that.
cosmopolitan. They get people from Netherlands, from Scandinavia, Germany, the Pennsylvanian Dutch, who are Germans, obviously, are here. Also, just in case you might see it, this is William Penn the son. William Penn and William Penn are two different people. There's the father and the son. They're not senior and junior. They're not first and second. They have the exact same name, and it's really really silly. Um, So they're not completely the same. They're just the son is the one who's the one who actually goes and establish Pennsylvania. He also is he founds he founds Philadelphia, which is the city of brotherly love, in its name. So more into that peace and love stuff.
Okay, so now we have the Maryland colony, which was established on a royal charter given to this dude, the Calvert's family, Lord Baltimore, who was the guy who actually established the place. It was a proprietary royal colony, so the king told them, "Hey, yeah, we get this land, but you're kind of like still under us." And basically, it was established as a sanctuary for the kind of like oppressed Catholic people because they came to the colony to escape persecution in England because a lot of people did not like the Catholics. They were like, ew, no. So they ran away and they got to the colony. So they're like, yay, now we have a place to live. Um, so for this, they wanted their nice religious freedom or whatever. They eventually established the Toleration Act. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. As it said, yay could not discriminate against the whichever religious sect of Christianity you were in because although it was originally created to, be like a little haven for all the Catholics, there were some other groups that came in. So this act basically was like, hey, yeah, it's for us, but like they low-key need a place too, so they can chill here. Um, this colony was in a pretty peak location as well, I wanted to say. So it was on the bay, you got like the Chesapeake Bay. So they did a lot of farming, a lot of cash cropping, made a lot of money that way. Colony was pretty peak except for the fact that they did use a lot of like coerced labor to make their money, but that's beside the point. So that's pretty much it for Maryland.
Yeah. Yeah, no. So the main reason for Toleration Act is because there was a Protestant majority in the colony very quickly, but the Catholics obviously were not like they didn't want to get persecuted again. So they were like, okay, we're the government as Catholics. We're just gonna say nobody, like everybody can do what they want here, and the Protestants were kind of just fine with that. They were like, okay, I guess. I mean, you're the boss here. Um, so yeah, they did that's why they got the Toleration Act in there.
Oh, the Carolinas.
Collide.
Um, these freaking Carolinas. Okay, they're not really that bad. I just don't remember. So they are shared one side. They started as one colony and one proprietary colony. So I think they had a bunch of different investors, and they're like, "Yeah, you're going to make us money." They split apart into what we now know as North and South Carolina. They aren't really important right now, not lore wise, history wise. So all you need to know, North Carolina, big on tobacco. South Carolina had a very big basis and plantation system. And then in South Carolina, they had Charleston, which was a very important trade port to the area.
Yeah. Also, I don't know where the Carolina hates comes from with all these people. They all hate Carolina apparently. I think they're pretty nice, personally. Anyway, we got
Yeah.
Georgia. Georgia's the last colony that was a part of the 13, but actually 12 because Delaware is in a colony. Um, so it was originally a charter colony with about 20 trustees. It was led by James Oglethorpe. His idea was to make a colony for debtors because he went to a debtors prison and was like, wow, there's a lot of people who are just poor. We should probably just get a place for them to go. So it was a penitentiary colony, being that it was technically a prison colony. It was a place for the debtors to kind of be put, and that was why it was actually so close to Spain, is because now we have this Georgian colony, and this is where we can put all the prisoners and put them in between us and Spain, so that if Spain does attack, the prisoners die first. Um, Originally, slavery was banned because he was not racist. He just was scared that with slavery there would be a lot of internal strife, which he was not entirely incorrect about. But he did have to unban it because the population was angry. They are prisoners. They do not have moral background. They definitely wanted money, so they were like, okay, we want slavery in here like all the rest of the South. So he did have to unban it, giving Georgia its like institution of slavery. But yeah, it was a military buffer from in between the rest of the colonies and the Spanish Florida, because there was a large fear in the English colonies of an attack from Spain, because Spain was still the world power at this point. Um, so then within this unit, we have there's a lot of empirical evolution within the British Empire. They begin to want to exert more control over the colonies. I say begin because they don't really yet. They still have salutary neglect in place. This is the idea that, for one, England is too busy in Europe, so they just physically cannot actually enforce the laws in North America. Like every 5 years, they're a bit busy. Also, if North America is making them enough money and not costing them too much money, um, yeah, things should be fine. They can just kind of do what they want. So this does lead to the development of new, or like kind of individual forms of government in the colonies. So in Virginia, you have the House of Burgesses, who met. This is the capital in Williamsburg, the old capital of Virginia. Um, the House of Burgesses would have met in this room on the right here. They were elected mainly, well, yeah, white landowners only, but they would meet in here and do kind of democratic-esque meetings. Then there was town meetings in the north. These were just like direct democracies. Everybody kind of got together and was like, "All right, what do we want to do here? What's the plan?" And then you have the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. It's the first constitution in America. It is obviously for Connecticut, and establishes the general blueprint for the Connecticut colony. Then you have the Navigation Acts. So these are based on mercantilism. Generally, it just imposes a lot of laws to try to make sure that England gets more money. So imports and exports kind of go through England first, so that England can tax them. Certain amounts of people have to be English on ships, and ships have to be created by England or created by the colonies, who are obviously also British. So there is inherent mercantilism to them. But again, salutary neglect, these were not really enforced yet. They're not important yet. People are very much so smuggling. Now the other thing, the triangular trade, it's actually a lie. There's like 8 triangles in this, and also it's a cheese wedge. Um, it's so the main people it's between is the North American colonies, the Caribbean colonies, Africa, Europe. Africa exports slaves, gets a lot of rum and manufactured goods. That's the main thing that Europe is giving, manufactured goods. Rum is being exported by the colonies. The main things from Caribbean is going to be sugar and molasses. A lot of the sugar and molasses goes up here, and then is created into rum to kind of go into the triangle. Um, it is more of a trapezoid, though. If you, I feel like that's the most simple shape you could really get it down to. The triangle is a lie. Um, yeah. Oh, this is you, Alice.
Oh, okay. So we got the different labor systems that were used in the British colonies because then again, they did not want to work. And what better way to not have to work is implement the use of labor of people that were not them. So we have the more, we could call this a little more moral, the little more moral option, which is indentured servitude, which is the most common at this specific time. And it was basically when a lot of people wanted to go over to the colonies, but a lot of people were not able to afford it. So these people that could afford it and then also needed labor, they were like, "Hey, I will cover your cost for going over to the New World and also give you a place to live for a little bit, but you have to work for me." That for like a certain amount of time, it would be like 7 years or something, etc. Where they just wouldn't make any money, but they'd like live under them and whatever. Um, yeah, and which resulted in things like Bacon's Rebellion, because even though it was the more moral of the two options, it still was not the best because the conditions for these people were not good and they were not getting paid for that time period. For that amount of time, even though it was like a contract that they did like consensually sign to like actually do it. And then we have African slave labor, which picked up with the transatlantic slave um trade, and especially since a lot of people were mad over the indentured servitude system, and a lot of people didn't like that. So that system began to die down. So we see the rise in the usage of slavery, which is literally they take people from Africa, they ship them over, and then don't pay them at all, and they're against their will. We know the whole thing. Yeah, and there's obviously resistance from these slaves because they did not ask to have to do this. Obviously, they don't like it. Not good. So there's resistance, and like they become kind of like a unified group, obviously, because they're unified against the people, they're enslavers. So they have slave songs, um, etc. Family was definitely very important when they were kept together because a lot of times they split up the families and stuff. Also, like trying to escape whatever, which shows in rebellions like the Stoner Rebellion. Very important slave rebellion trying to run away. Don't know that, remember. Um, so basically, out of these colonies, there were certain areas that they used these more like labor they use these labor systems more so in like slavery in particular because sometimes they needed it more than they did the others, especially like more southern colonies um needed it more because they farmed more, and when they farmed more they needed more people to work on said farms. So we have the BWI, and then the Southern, and then Chesapeake, Middle, and then New England. And as you can see, those kind of list, like this is in most to least used, and this also kind of sort of lists them from like south to north, so you see that pattern there. Yeah, and then there Barbados slave codes because not good system.
Yeah. So going a bit more rebellions. Bacon's rebellion, it was because the indentured servants were getting pretty bad lands out in the west of Virginia, a lot of which had already been promised to Native Americans. So there was a little bit of tension between the indentured servants, Native Americans. They attacked each other. Then Bacon, who was kind of leading the indentured servants in Virginia, burned Jamestown twice. Lots of tension between that, which is why they kind of switched to African slave labor because they can see that having a subordinate white population in a colony was very bad for social stability. Stoner Rebellion, also in Virginia, I believe. It was just a group of slaves escaped. They started just killing any white person they saw. They are pretty quickly shut down, but obviously that was kind of scared a lot of people, which helped lead to the creation of harsher slave codes. Lots of these are based on the Barbados slave codes. This is the British West Indies. So that would be down here. Barbados is obviously part of the British West Indies. So that is brought up by, I think, South Carolinian planters bring that up to South Carolina, and then it spreads along the rest of the southern colonies up until really the Chesapeakes, with Maryland being one of the more northern ones that use it.
Alrighty, right. Next up, we also got the Native American Wars, or some of the most major ones. All right, so first up, we got the Beaver Wars. Basically, it was the Iroquois Confederacy. They were faced with the loss of beavers in their land, and beavers are like an essential, like just species to the environment because wood, and 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 they basically wanted to expand influence in the Ohio River Valley because of that. And then the British eventually allied with the Iroquois Confederacy. And then the French had a much larger alliance against them. Yeah. Okay, next up, there was the Pequot War, which the Pequot tribe wanted dominance over the fur trade, but this was at the expense of Europeans in the region, and also other Native American groups and tribes in that region. Yeah, and then it ended up with multiple massacres of the Pequot, most notably the massacre of Mystic River, and this was one of the bloodiest wars slash conflicts involved um, with Native Americans in the U.S. And then there was Metacom's War, also known as King Philip's War, in which Wampanoag chief Metacom, right, basically fought against British expansion into the New England region in the Northeast. And then it lasted about a year. It was really brutal. And of course, Metacom ended up dead. And then bringing one back, the Pueblo Revolt, which is now in time period, also known as Pope's Rebellion. I mean, you already know. Pueblo people rebelled. It was successful for about 12 years, and it ended with the Spanish having a lesser influence or a less strict influence on society. And, of course, developed of the Native complex or Native protector complex, both in the government and also in the people instead, as well in society. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, Metacom's War, it also had the effect it scared a lot of people in New England because it was like very, very brutal, especially some of I mean, the attacks on both sides were bad, but what scared the Massachusetts was scalping used by the Native Americans. They like that was kind of their trophy of like who they killed is they like took the scalp off their head. So obviously, lots of Massachusetts were like, "Whoa," they did not like all that. Obviously, they were about just as brutal in many ways, but they were very scared. It led to things like the Salem witch trials. I think yeah, it's good. The general theme is just that as there's a lot more tensions between European powers who ally with different native groups. All of these have different alliances within them that kind of had who was with what, except the Pueblo Revolt. Really, that one was kind of one on one. Then we have diversity in America. America begins to develop a diverse society through the colonial era. A lot of the majority, a lot of Americans were English and Welsh. But there were other like pretty large minority groups that were kind of developing. So the Dutch were very common as New York was taken. Again, originally a Dutch colony, so they just kind of are pulled over. But then there's the Scotch Irish. They're both there to escape generally bad crop yields in their home, but also just try to escape England as they're expanding through Ireland and Scotland. The German populations began to kind of move in. Obviously, through slavery, African population grows, and then there's a few other smaller groups. This is pretty big in developing the idea that America is a melting pot. This is the earliest time where you'll really start seeing it. We begin to develop an identity of a group of groups of different people.
All right. And then next up, basically after that, there was the start of a period of unity in America, right? And then with this, there was the Great Awakening and also the Enlightenment. So the Great Awakening, it was basically a religious revival. It was led by like many basically large preachers and like spokespeople of like religious literature and all that. Like Jonathan Edwards and George Whitfield. And then they basically used open air preaching in which they basically preached like it outside. It was like basically just like public preaching. Kind of like that. And then the Great Awakening, especially with like those preachers, they encourage personal relationships with God or having a more personal relationship with religion, or being more dedicated just to yourself, to God. And then with the Enlightenment, of course, it was European movement, but it was more overly focused on rationality. Unless instead of being focused on religion, it was more focused on questioning religion, or basically asking, or figuring out that the answer to everything isn't God or religion. That there's actually like scientific reasoning for why things happen. So like, of course, this inspired much like rational and intellectual thought in the U.S. Arriving from Europe, and many ideas from the movement also inspired future American thought, as well as future rebellions and all that. Like of course you got Thomas Hobbes, and then also John Locke with his natural rights, and then Montesquieu, and then you also have like rebellions like um, the Haitian Rebellion, in which the first successful slave rebellion, also the Great Jamaica Rebellion, like those like rebellions there directly after.
Yeah.
Also, big inspiration for the American Revolution. Yeah, the Enlightenment is like really a
Yeah,
strong
very,
backbone
very
within.
big one. Yeah, we come back to it later
Yeah.
too.
Okay, here we see Americans kind of pulling away from the British crown. And this comes in many forms. So we start seeing early signs of wanting westward expansion. We see America wanting new markets, and both of those are blocked by Britain. America wanted to self govern, which Britain also was like, no, that's happening. And they also started impressing the Americans, which is basically forcibly conscripting men into public service. So that's not
Yeah,
great.
especially Navy.
Um, is it Navy?
Yeah, Navy specifically is generally impressment.
Okay, thank you. Um, but there's not anything too much escalated, and there shouldn't be anything like in any like river valley or like anything near Ohio with the French. Like, there's nothing. As long as nothing like that happens, I think
Yeah, yeah, we should be
that the
good.
Americans are good with their relations to the British, right?
That would be
Right.
terrible, wouldn't it be?
Yeah, right, Adio? Right, Atlas? It'd be horrible.
To be terrible. Anyway,
Yeah,
I mean,
Pretty
so
bad.
Unit 3
be
starts
a
in
shame.
1754,
Give or take.
ends in 1800. Time period encompasses the start of the French and Indian War up until the Revolution of 1800. The key concepts are as follows. The British attempts to assert tighter control over North American colonies and the colonial resolve to pursue self-government led to a colonial independence movement and the Revolutionary War. The American Revolution's democratic and Republican ideals inspired new experiments with different forms of government, and migration within North America and competition over resources, boundaries, and trade intensified conflicts among peoples and nations. It does in fact seem that something happened in the Ohio River Valley. Who could have seen
Really?
this one coming? Um,
Whoops.
so oh, I think we jinxed it, guys. It's fine.
Yikes.
We'll get him next time. So the lead up, there was border disputes, especially in the Ohio River Valley, but honestly across lots of the north sections of America. And then there was early European west okay, early European westward expansion. They are trying to kind of go west still. This is already kind of a developing thought. So the war is Great Britain and the colonies versus France and Native Americans, and then later Spain. Develops most specifically because George Washington goes and is trying to kind of get the French out of the Ohio River Valley, and then he accidentally, kind of accidentally starts a war. He's very good at that apparently. So the main important development during the war is the Albany Congress of 1754. The big idea out of it is Ben Franklin's join or die, and that is that the colonies need to kind of join together under an organization mainly to establish better native relations, like a centralized kind of office of native relations. The issue is that they'd all have to pay extra taxes and money towards the organization, and after they hear that, all the states are like, no, no, we'll pass. But the idea for join or die is like developing. Then we have the outcomes of the war. So Great Britain, they get Florida. They also get lands up until the Mississippi River. They established the Proclamation Line of 1763. The colonists are upset by this. They just want all that land, and now they can't colonize it. They really want to, and a lot of times they do try to illegally colonize land. England is very much so in debt. They do win the war, but they are incredibly in debt. And they begin to tax the Americans because, after all, George Washington's the guy who caused the war. It's his fault. So Americans' fault. They should get they should bear the brunt of the expenses. Mr. Eddie
Yo,
Howe.
DMs
um,
real quick.
yeah. Sorry, my bad. Okay. Right. So George Grenville. Right. What's PM?
Prime Minister.
Prime Minister. Sorry. He was appointed as the Prime Minister. Of Great Britain, and he basically made a plan in order to bring America under control. Right. Um. Of course, he ended salutary neglect, in which it was basically the right for, or it was that the colonies basically governed themselves, right? Because the British weren't exerting as much control over the colonies. So the colonies were basically at that point just in charge of themselves to an extent, which just enforced the existing laws, especially the Navigation Acts. And then this also kept in the wartime policy, kept it in place, especially with the Quartering Act, in which that the British were able to keep and force homes and houses to basically house soldiers in like their colonial homes, and this also led to Parliament enacting some new taxes that weren't
Yeah,
too important.
just one or two, only a few. Okay, that's a
Yeah,
lot
only
of
a
taxes.
few.
All right, so 1733, we have the Molasses Act. This is like obviously far before French and Indian War, but and it is also ignored because of solitary neglect. But that develops into the Sugar Act. It's kind of an amendment to the Molasses Act, which is an indirect tax. It's more specifically on merchants, and it's about like sugar kind of coming into America and going out of America. It's very much, though, not paid by Americans. They don't really pay it any heed. The Currency Act of 1764 isn't a tax, but it establishes that the colonies have to use the pound. They can't use their own colonial currencies, which they had been. The Quartering Act of 1765 is kept in place from the French and Indian War, but is kind of like, yeah, we're keeping it here for real. Then we have the Stamp Act, which is a direct tax. It was eventually repealed after a lot of backlash against it, but it took about a year. And it was a 1 to 2 cent tax on any paper goods. But because it was felt directly by the people, that's why they were a lot more upset by it. After it was repealed in '66, the Parliament established the Declaratory Act, which is basically said that, okay, we'll repeal the Stamp Act, but we're doing it because we want to do it. You guys have to listen to what we say. Um, and it just kind of was like, yeah, we're in charge. So then after this, they enact the Townshend Acts. This comes in with the new Prime Minister of England again. His last name's Townshend. I forget his first name. But these are a series on a lot of. This is a series of taxes on luxury goods. That's your glass, your lead, your tea. Eventually, it is repealed again because of backlash, but they keep the tax on tea. Then there's also the Boston Massacre. I know the story very well, I think, but kind of starts as a smaller riot. They're throwing snowballs, and then they start throwing rocks and oyster shells, and then twin. They start throwing oyster shells, the British fire upon them, and this is like a huge scandal. They are very upset by this in the colonies. And then you have the Tea Act of 73 that establishes that only the British East India Company can sell tea to the colonies. The colonists cannot get their tea from anywhere else. And they are all very upset by this because they like their other tea. Also, they don't like paying the tea taxes. They don't want to buy tea from the British East India Company. So this very quickly leads into the Boston Tea Party, where the Sons of Liberty, dressed as Mohawk Indians, they get on the boat and they start throwing all the tea into the river. They cost the British $2 million in today's currency in tea. Um, yeah, big money loss for the British. They are very upset by this. So they impose the Intolerable Acts. These are 4 or 5 acts that were kind of aimed at making the colonies kind of pay for what they did. These are the Judiciary Act, which basically allowed colonists to be tried outside of colonial courts, and more specifically in English courts and in like naval courts, like military courts, which are a lot more unfair to the colonists. The Massachusetts Government Act, which repeals the Charter of Massachusetts, making it a royal colony, and also establishing a governor loyal to the king. It is the Boston Harbor Act, closes the Boston Harbor until reparations are paid for the Tea Party. Then there's Quartering Act is kind of brought even more into it. It's kind of brought in again, which allows the troops to be quartered directly into the homes of people in Boston. Sometimes included is the Quebec Act, which expands the territory of Quebec, which I think at that point was kind of under the control of the British. But it also allowed for French Catholics in Quebec, which the Protestants of America did not like. They did not like that the Catholics were kind of getting a place to live there because that they felt threatened by that. So the intolerable acts, obviously, they're called the intolerable acts by the colonists. It's not like the British called them the coercive acts, and even then, they were like all separate acts. But the colonists very much hated them. They also hated the idea of representation, how it was being handled in Parliament. Colonists believed they were not being represented because they had a culture of self-rule. Parliament argued for virtual representation, the idea that Parliament represented the interests of all British citizens, no matter where they were, and that was kind of how they represented everybody in the British Empire. So that meant like literally any British colony and England itself, and then the nearby places they had subjugated, those are all under virtual representation. So they get people into Parliament. That is the interest of all British citizens. Colonists want local representation, which is, what is literally you pick somebody from your place to go represent you in Parliament. Um, there is a political cartoon here. Obviously, you can kind of read the description, but this is the idea of virtual representation, where the virtual representation is this figure in brown is giving the government permission to just kind of rob colonists. And it's kind of just the idea that like because of the idea of virtual representation not representing the colonists, they are able to be kind of robbed and just like exploited, even though this is just really what the entire British Empire is doing. But you can see Britannia blinded is approaching a pitfall, which is obviously pretty symbolic to the British, because that is literally just the personification of the British Empire.
Um, After we see the amalgamation of oppression against the Americans, we see them start to push back. So this is their way of resistance, specifically organized resistance. This was a group, well, multiple groups that aimed to spread grievances from the colonies to fight the Stamp Act, which was really stupid. So here we have the Sons of Liberty and the Daughters of Liberty. They are separate. I don't know if they really work together all that much, but they are kind of like parallel to each other.
Yeah, parallel.
Sons of Liberty kind of actually do things, and the Daughters of Liberty don't. That's really
Whoa! The Daughters of Liberty, they were doing economic protests. They just weren't
well.
crazy.
The Sons of Liberty were taking action, like the
like visible action. The Daughters of Liberty were like low key protests.
yeah, they were peaceful. Yes. Well, and then we have the Stamp Act Congress. This was 9 colonies. They all met. That taxation without representation was tyrannical. And then they're like, huh, how do we get this to stop? Oh, I know, we can repeal it. And then they were able to repeal the Stamp Act, which is so cool.
So awesome of them. Look at them go. Stamp Act Congress getting it repealed.
Yes.
Wait, so we have another thing that the colonists did because they were a little unhappy with Britain. So they formed the First Continental Congress, and it was basically a like an organization, a little group that was made out of representatives from 12 of the colonies, not 13, because Georgia was not involved in this. And basically, they met together and discussed what the colonies as a whole would do in response to what Britain was doing. So they decided for themselves the kind of boycotting they would do towards the taxes and everything, and like what they would do for protesting. It basically decided on everything that they would be doing, which was it was peaceful. It was peaceful. They were like, we want to resist peacefully, but we all want to be united in our efforts, so it makes like an impact. They, of course, obviously made like one of the major things that they opposed was the Intolerable Acts and the Quartering Acts, and they made a big deal out of their unalienable rights because they're like, this is the rights that we have as colonists, and you guys are violating them. It's our, this is why we think you're doing this. So they're big on that. And one big thing to take from this is that they definitely still wanted to be British. Like, they still considered themselves like British subjects, British colonists. They were just like, hey, since we're still British, we want you guys to treat us like that. And we want to be able to like peacefully live here under your government, except you guys just aren't doing the best right now. So maybe like fix things up a little bit. We'll be a little happier. So that's pretty much it. Was about the
In
first.
layman's term, they were telling the
first one.
British to lock in.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. In addition to like America's whiny, like, I hate the tax. We also see the Enlightenment in that. So we have two main guys, John Locke and Tommy Hobbes. John Locke, he was like, humans should have the rights of property just as they're born. They shouldn't have to earn those rights. Thomas Hobbes, he was the big guy with the social contract. The people have to government. The society gives up some of their rights and some of their liberties in exchange for the government protection. But if the government sucks booty butt cheek at protecting the government, nope, protecting the people can rebel against the government and replace it. So that's enlightenment. Great awakening during this time, the religious ideas. Um, During this time, the Great Awakening was like one-on-one people with the God, but it also promoted like the individual relationships with God that in turn promoted challenging traditional authority within the Christian world, per se.
Hmm. Yeah. It was generally like traditional authority in Christianity, but then that kind of transplanted over to let's, maybe not trust monarchs so much. So that was kind of cool. Atlas.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Okay, so then again, we have the Second Continental Congress because we have the first one, and they're like, yeah, that was kind of helpful, but like it really didn't work. So let's make a second one. So with the start, we're starting the revolution, right?
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
next slide, but yeah.
yeah. Okay, so basically at the start of the revolution, pretty much, they're like, hey, yeah, we had our first Continental Congress for like peaceful protest against what the British is doing. We need to make a second one to decide what we're going to be doing in terms of war efforts because we ain't taking this. So they come up with the Second Continental Congress, and they meet in various areas around the colonies because obviously they want to, spread the word, make sure everyone's involved because, this is a whole big thing. So they've met in places like Philadelphia, Baltimore, Lancaster, New York, aka New York, and they sent commissioners out for foreign relations because obviously they want to have a little bit of airline because they're just a bunch of new colonies and they need to make sure that they have at least like some influence, some backing. So some key leaders, a part of the Second Continental Congress, would be John Hancock, is the president of the Continental Congress, and George Washington is the commander. We know him. And they met in order to coordinate what they would be doing for, their military because if you're gonna have military, you kind of want them to you kind of want there to be a little bit of communication between each other so everyone knows what's actually going on, because it's a little bit important when you're like fighting. And they drafted a bunch of different articles and legislation, well, not legislation, but kind of like the Olive Branch Petition, the Articles of Confederation, obviously, and then Declaration of Independence much later on when they're actually like, yo, this is getting too much. We need to separate, but that isn't until much later. Right now, they're just still fighting for their rights as British citizens, but they're like actually fighting this time.
Much later is in like 3 slides.
Yeah. And then we got Common Sense by Thomas Paine. I really hope everyone knows this one because this is very important. Thomas Paine was this pamphlet written by, not Thomas Paine, Common Sense was a pamphlet written by Thomas Paine, and it was basically his address to American people as a whole, because at the time of when the revolution was starting, a lot of people were like, well, why do we need to fight against them? It's fine. We don't need rights. It's okay. But Common Sense, he wrote this to basically persuade everyone, hey guys, these are the rights that you guys have as not just British citizens, but as people. And it's like literal common sense to see that that king over there is violating all of our rights, and that is why we need to like stand up and fight against them. It was basically him trying to convince the common man in a way that would be very like universally understood and easy to, grasp. So this was printed in kind of like mass, spread around the colonies. Um, Definitely argued against the British monarchy and the hereditary succession because they're very like anti-tyrant at this point, because it's not like he was elected or anything because he would be a good king. So he was like, "Hey, this ain't right. This kind of sucks. We should be against that because low-key freedom is pretty cool. Rights are kind of great." Um, yeah. Oh yeah, he was anonymous at first. I think covered everything else.
Yeah. It is. I think. Yeah. It's the biggest. Sorry, best-selling piece of literature proportional to population in American history. Like it has not been beaten yet. Obviously, proportional population has been beaten in pure number, but like really every American had read this thing. This was very big in the colonies. What? Oh yeah.
What's wrong with this slide? There's nothing wrong.
Right.
So, guys, this here, we are fighting for America.
Yeah.
And we come across a group
Really?
of people called the Patriots. What was shut up? I spent a lot of time on this slide. Okay.
Yeah.
What
We
is
can tell.
patriotism? Shut up. Patriotism. To quote Merriam Webster, the quality of large devotion for a country.
They call Merriam Webster.
So, what is this? Well, in context of the American Revolution, so basically we had the Patriots and the Tories. The Patriots were colonists against British Dominion, and they formally declared independence on July 3rd, 1776. And this was done with the keystone figures of Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Thomas Paine. The Patriots, this was a group that was representative of the population that made up the colonies. On the other hand, the Tories were basically the colonists who were still on the British side of things.
I think I like what you did with the eagle right there.
Which one?
Anyway,
Which one?
so on to Lexington and Concord. So this is the first battle of the American Revolution on April 19th, 1775. The British regulars, aka Redcoats, they march upon upon the Boston towns of Lexington and Concord, where there were stockpiles of guns and black powder. The Americans stand off at Lexington. This is where the shot heard around the world is. They are forced to retreat. However, they are very quickly kind of outnumbered and destroyed. So they run up to Concord. At Concord, when the British reach Concord, they see nobody, and then they get up to the up to Northbridge, Concord, and the Americans are able to actually like put up a fight and repel the British out of Concord, and then the British are forced to retreat all back across this line to Boston, with a bunch of militias, like different colonial militias, coming in and kind of stopping or like kind of hitting them hard while they're retreating back. So this leads into the siege of Boston, which because the Americans are very easily able to push them and surround the city.
All right. So we have the Declaration of Independence, the big one. Pretty important, I gotta say. And this document was the formal declaration and document that the colonies, they drafted up and signed and presented to the king that was like, yeah, so we're officially leaving you. Bye. This is why. And the Declaration of Independence can be split up into four parts. The first one being the preamble, which basically is just the summary of, hey dude, this is what the rest of this document is going to be about, thanks. And then the Declaration of Natural Rights, which is the summary of all the natural rights that the colonists had come to very much love, very influenced by the Enlightenment, that kind of thing. And then the list of grievances, which was them explaining, yeah, okay, we just told you what our rights are, and this is what you're doing that's violating each and every one of them. Okay? So that's the reasoning behind separation. And then the resolution of independence at the very end of the declaration is the final, their final statement that they are officially leaving, that formal declaration at the end of the document, saying that the 13 colonies are going to be their own sovereign thing apart from Great Britain. Yep, is addressed to the king.
Yep. All right. So then, during the siege of Boston, we have the Battle of Bunker Hill on June 17th, of 75. So there is an American militia fortified on Breeds Hill and Bunker Hill. The British are on both hills, actually. I don't know. I said the hill. So it is a British victory. The hills are taken, but the casualties are 400 American casualties to 1,000 British casualties. As you can see in this picture, and in basically any, or not picture, in the painting, but in any painting that you see, they always love to show how many British died. This was a incredibly bloody battle for the British. And this is on the American forces are incredibly undersupplied still. I mean, the whole story of seeing the whites in their eyes. They didn't have the gunpowder. Really, they should not have been able to inflict that many casualties. And yet they did. So it was a huge morale boost for the Americans, and also the British realized that they actually have to like take the Americans seriously. This isn't just going to be like, oh, let's go get rid of these farmers. So yeah, that was pretty important there. Siege of Boston, April 19th to March 17th, 76, so 1 year later. They do go through a winter. The American troops are holding Boston down, small skirmishes surrounding like Bunker Hill. Henry Knox marches through winter to bring cannons from Fort Ticonderoga, which the fort was taken in the night by Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys, as well as Benedict Arnold. In the night of March 4th to 5th, cannons are moved to Dorchester Heights, and the British are forced to retreat to Nova Scotia. They were possibly kind of planning to attack, but then a bad storm like completely derailed their notion for attack, and they already were not really keen on the idea. So they did just leave the city and deserted it all, bringing thousands of loyalists with them. And then into the Battle of Brooklyn. Uh, Washington and the American Army, they go to New York to try to. They expect that the British are going to show up there next because New York has a high loyalist population. So it happens over a couple days. Battle of Brooklyn from the 27th to the 29th of 1776. But when the British ships first started arriving, one American there said, "I thought all of London was afloat," or he wrote that. Um, so there was like a lot of British ships here. It was a very large force, unlike the one that they had seen at Boston, much smaller in comparison. There was a British victory by far, as this thing from the American Battlefield Trust shows. The British found a route around the. I think this is on north side. No, this is correctly oriented. So this would be the east side. They found a way around east and were able to surround the American troops. The Americans were able to escape across the East River because of during the night in like a bout of fog, and the Americans faced further losses at White Plains, Fort Washington, and Fort Lee. Eventually, they were forced to escape over the Delaware River, making camp just across. And then we have the Battle of Trenton and Princeton on the 26th of December and the January 3rd, 1777. So Washington crosses the Delaware Christmas night to mount a surprise attack on the Hessian forces established at Trenton. Um, at the Battle of Trenton, 0 casualties were actually suffered during the battle, with over 1,000 Hessians being either captured or killed. The two men did freeze to death while marching to Trenton. The Hessians were, contrary to popular belief, not actually drunk. Their defenses, according to their own writings too, um, so like I mean they're conscious enough to write. Plus, they were supposedly on very high defense. The reason why their defenses were lower is because they were supposed to receive reinforcements, but the commander who was supposed to be coming was about like a town or two over, and he was thirsty but not for water. Um, and then so the Trenton was a huge morale boost, and then furthermore they went and attacked Princeton too, catching the British off guard and quickly gaining surrender there. There was actually two battles of Trenton, so they won in total 3 battles over 10 days. And it was a huge morale boost overall. Loss of supplies won, and the British had to evacuate southern New Jersey, with the Americans being able to establish a winter camp in Morristown.
Right. And then next up, we have the Battle of Saratoga. Now, the Battle of Saratoga from September of 1777 to October of 1777 is considered to be the turning point of the Revolution. It's come up with two distinct battles, Horatio Gates and Benedict. And so for those two main reasons, one is because it was an American victory. So it was a really big American victory, of course, and it really turned around the morale against all the patriots and American citizens and colonists, who supported the American side. And then it also brought in, as it says here, the French alliance, in which the French alliance was, spoiler alert, said to be the only reason we could have won the war. A lot of Americans hate the French for some reason. And then,
Indeed.
anyways, along with France, Spain and the Netherlands also joined to the American side to some different degrees. Like Spain wasn't like it didn't have as much as an influence, but still, France for sure had the biggest influence.
Yeah, yeah. France was the most. Spain sent a few officers and some supplies. Netherlands sent only a little bit of supplies. Um, but yeah, no, it was a very big turning point for the war, especially with that French alliance.
Valley Forge. So this isn't a battle, but one of the bigger events during the Revolutionary War. So this was a period of time. Washington troops were like, we can't do this anymore. Morale in the dumps. They had no supplies and ridden of disease. It was a snowstorm and they were barefooted. But um they were able to make it through this like rough time because of Washington's lead. Because they because of like this amount of time they all spent into shape with Washington, and also Friedrich Wilhelm August Henrik Ferdinand Frere von Steuben, or Baron von Steuben, this Prussian officer guy. Um, he was cool. I just remember he kind of whipped him into shape as well. This part of the army, if they have a bigger sense of unity, and it was a booster. And they also gained a French alliance during this time period of 77 to 78.
Yeah. All right. So then we have the Southern Campaign. This is there's lots of series of battles. There's a lot to talk about, so I just put them all in one. The first was a big loss. Siege of Charleston is a big loss of troops. Economic center goes to the British. It's like the center of South Carolina, as we talked about way earlier. So when the British got this, there's obviously the want to kind of take the South back. The South also is very loyalist in comparison because they didn't have to struggle with the same things that New England did at Boston with all the taxes. They didn't have that same revolutionary fervor, so they were very much so in support of the British. Nathaniel Greene, he is one of Washington's most trusted officers. He's been there since Boston. He's a very, very good guy right there. Horatio is originally sent to kind of deal with the British in the South, but he absolutely does terribly in the Battle of Camden. So he is done. Washington says, "Let's send my guy in. I know this Greene fella, and he's gonna do good things down there." So Greene is extremely hard on the American troops. He does push them like far past their limit, but even though every battle is technically a loss, they're all Pyrrhic victories for the British, which means the British Pyrrhic victory is when you win, but you've like lost a lot of your you've lost usually a lot of troops. So the British, even though they win every battle in a way, they have to continuously retreat nonetheless. And then later, uh, during the race to the Dan River up here, the Nathaniel Greene's forces are able to escape just over the Dan River into Virginia, get a large boost of supplies, and then come right back down and fight the British even harder. So it ends up being an American victory for the most part. This is Eddie L again.
Oh, all right, all right. Battle of Yorktown. So this was basically the last battle of the American Revolutionary War, right? Or that battle, yeah, yeah. So 1781 from September to October, in which General Cornwallis had tried to take the South, right? So he had pushed into Virginia, and he had stopped his army at Yorktown. But then Washington's army basically sieged around Yorktown and like surrounded them in order to where cut off resources from getting in to Cornwallis, and basically just cut off anything that could help the army survive. You know, and then of course besieged like combined French and American forces, and then this eventually led to Cornwallis' surrender on October 19th, 1781, in which it officially, well, not officially, but it had informally ended the war to that point.
Yeah.
So, what kind of happened after that? And I say kind of because the revolution technically isn't over. That's just a technical term that revolution is. So, Treaty of Paris formally ends the kind of war they have going on. This leads to the obvious America's independence from Britain, but it is also the loss of all the alliances that the colonies possessed while under the British Dominion. So we have a bunch of things. A rise of republicanism. We have the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom, which will be tighter, the Articles of Confederation, and this also inspires other revolutions. The Articles of Confederation, we see prioritize states' rights over the federal government because of the fear of a tyrannical government. More on states' rights later. So, the other revolutions that were in the Atlantic world space, we see the French, the Haitian, and then all of the Latin American revolutions just back to back to back. Very scary Haitian revolution for the South because it could possibly spark slave revolts for their plantations. But yeah,
Yeah.
main effects of the Revolutionary War.
This is Atlas.
Okay, and then we got the failures of the Articles of Confederation because when you know when the 13 colonies became the United States, they needed something to, structure their government, and that was the Articles of Confederation. But unfortunately, the Articles of Confederation were not able to last because, they were pretty weak. And these are some of the things that were kind of overlooked in making the Articles of Confederation and the reason why it failed. So, first of all, the Articles of Confederation did not give the federal government the ability to create, like, raise a national militia. And since they were not able to do this, they weren't really able to enforce anything. So they couldn't enforce like national taxes and stuff. And when they did try to tax people, they'd get a little mad and stuff like that. So no taxes were able to contribute to the army, which resulted in things like Shays' Rebellion. And it also didn't really establish a good central government. So the federal government was pretty weak in terms of power. So it had no ability to regulate trade between the colonies. So between the different, not the colonies, the different states now, because they're states, because they're not colonies anymore. The different states, there was a lot of differing in the kind of trade and commerce that was between them, because like sometimes they'd even have like different forms of currency between the different states. So that was kind of crazy because the central government could not really, control what happened up in there. And they also had the inability to enforce laws, which also kind of ties back into the fact that they have really no militia, but at the same time, they still could not enforce federal laws. And therefore, also, they had the inability to manage foreign policy because, you have no army, you're not really getting any revenue from taxes, you can't even control what's in your own country, you can't really do much outside of it. So when the Barbary Pirates thing happened with the British and everything, with maritime conflict, with both of those, they really had no way to defend themselves or like combat them very well, given that they were pretty weak federally. So basically, TLDR, they were not really able to sustain themselves properly under the Articles of Confederation because it kind of just made the US a chaotic lump of states that were not really coordinated with each other on a federal level. And then also, we have the road to the Constitution, because if the Articles of Confederation aren't working, and we still have the US that's existing, then they needed something to replace it. So basically, at first, they tried to just amend the articles, but that didn't really end up working. But that's besides the point. Some of the things that um were needed, that they were like, hey, the Articles of Confederation don't have this, so we need to either add them or make something completely new that has these. So they were like, we need a strong central government. We need a Bill of Rights. We need an establishment of different state governments and what the state governments are going to be able to do and decide for themselves, like constitutions. And then ratification of rights on like a federal level, which meant that they would have to get approval of
It should be
1/3.
It should be 3/4. That might be a font thing when we switch to
Yeah,
font.
3/4 of the states had to like agree on it to, yeah, make something federal. And it was pretty controversial, the Constitution itself, because there were the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Federalists? Yeah, that's right. Okay. The Federalists were like, yo, we like this Constitution. We need to make this Constitution because the articles are too far gone. And the Anti-Federalists were like, no, we don't like it. So they eventually came to the 3/5 compromise. And this was because one of the big arguments in the Constitution was what would be done about the ratio of like how things would be decided based on the population of different states. So there was the argument of they get representation in the federal government based on population, which was great for big states, big population, because that would mean they would have a lot of representatives in the federal government. And there was also the argument that they wanted equal representation between every single state, regardless of population, which was good for the small states, but bad for the big states. So they're arguing about that, and that resulted in the Three-Fifths Compromise. And there was a couple of other things that had to be decided on to eventually get the Constitution like ratified and everything, like the Great Compromise and the Commerce Compromise. And then also one more thing that came out of this was that they agreed that a Bill of Rights needed to be added to the Constitution. This wasn't made originally, but it was like said like, okay, we'll ratify it, but we need to make this later. So eventually the Bill of Rights was implemented, and that basically just outlined it's a Bill of Rights. It says everything that citizens what rights they're owed for being that. And it is a legal way to for them to protect these things since they're in writing.
Yeah, no, so the compromises, 3/5 is the slaves counting. So for every
Mm-hmm.
5 slaves through count. Great Compromise is the bicameral legislature. So that is,
Population.
yeah, population versus equal representation. Commerce Compromise agrees that the slave trade could not be banned until 1808 within the states, and then in the year 1808, it will be banned. That is kind of important later, but it honestly does not actually end the slave trade because it only bans it in states. That means territories. It is not banned. DC is a territory. Within the United States, the slave trade is banned. However, if you go a couple blocks down from the Capitol building, you could buy slaves. It is not really gone. It is just lessened in the actual states, but there's still an internal slave trade too. So it's really not over by any sense of the word. It's just
Not
kind
great.
of there.
Right. Next up, we've got the Federalist Papers, which are kind of important.
Kinda.
So they were written by a combination of Hamilton, Madison, and John Jay, showing their support for the Constitution. Okay, so James Madison. Okay, so James Madison. Mhm. He he wrote paper 10, which was against factions. Um, however, which were viewed as inevitable, and then he also supported large republics in order to eliminate the issue. And then Madison again with paper 51, he wrote up the concept of checks and balances, in which every branch, judicial, executive, and legislative, would check on each other in order to make sure one doesn't have too much power or potentially go into a tyrannical state. And it also aimed to lift the fears of anti-federalists who were afraid of a tyrannical government. Yeah. And then Hamilton, who wrote the other 51, called for an executive branch or a leader or some kind of, I don't know, president or like some, and then specifically for paper 78, Hamilton, who also wrote, the other 51, he basically established that the judicial branch would be the weakest, and also the concept of Supreme Court justices. Again, he wrote the other 51.
Okay.
Other 51 guys. Yeah.
You're on Washington.
Yeah. Jay got sick after like 5 or something.
Okay. Please.
Like, yeah.
Washington. You're on Washington, Eddie L.
I know. Oh my god. Hold on. Sorry. Wait, give me a sec. It refreshed. No. There we go. Okay. Washington administration. So, did you know, fun fact, George Washington is the only president to have a unanimous election by the EC for both terms. That's pretty cool in my opinion, So he was actually also known as the president of presidents. So he set the president of the cabinet, in which it was the treasury consisting with Hamilton. Um, it was the state with Jefferson, and then war with Knox. Sounds familiar. And and justice with Edmund Randolph. And then he also set the precedent with a president having a limit of 2 terms. And the president also set that precedent of the farewell address, in which, basically just their farewell address, like after they leave their term. And in his farewell address specifically, he warned against political parties and how they could possibly divide and harm the nation, and also encouraged neutrality among the nation. With that, and then he also brought out with this came the Judiciary Act, in which uh, it established the 13 colonies with DC,
No,
and
no,
then South
no.
Carolina.
What?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
wait.
yeah. You know
No,
what I mean, gang.
I don't know what you mean. Okay, so
You don't know what I
that is
mean. Would you like to?
13 district courts, 13 courts
Yeah.
of appeal, and the Supreme Court with 6 justices. What? Okay, it's fine. Okay. Um, yeah, that's the main thing with Washington. Um, his cabinet's truly great. We got two war heroes. We got the French ambassador and Edmund Randolph. He's Randolph. Look at him go.
Random Randolph. Okay, we have. So basically, Washington was like, yo, I'm gonna warn you guys about political parties. And you know what they did? They went and they created political parties! Woo! Yeah! So basically, we have the emergence of the two parties, is no kind of sort of with the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists, and they were beefing. They did not like each other. So we have the Federalists represented by Hamilton, and we have the Democratic Republicans represented by Jefferson. The Federalists more leaned into a looser interpretation of like the government, the Constitution, the laws. They were like, okay, they're there as an outline, but we can bend them a little as long as they don't break. They definitely wanted a national bank. That was one big thing that Hamilton was like, I need my bank. And the Democratic Republicans were like, no, you don't. They had things like the necessary and proper clause, which was the belief that of the enlargement of the power especially granted to Congress, which was basically like, hey, the Constitution says this, but it also says that if something needs to be done that's like not explicitly stated in the um Constitution that says need to be done, it can be done by the federal government because it's under the necessary and proper clause. They definitely favored having good British relations because they were like, yeah, okay, we're a separate nation now, but it'll be better for us in the long run if we're like at least cordial with them, which involved trade, which goes into how they were more leaning into the development of more modernizing manufacturing instead of more agrarian centered economies. And then the Democratic Republicans, they were more into stricter interpretations of the Constitution and everything, and they were like, if it doesn't say it explicitly, it needs to be said explicitly if it needs to be done. And they were more in favor of having relations with the French because they were like, we're not really gonna deal with the British right now, but the French are pretty okay. Let's do with them instead. And also, they were more centered towards agrarian economies and the importance of agriculture and farming in terms of like producing revenue for the nation. And they are constantly clashing and everything, so that resulted in stuff like the Neutrality Proclamation. Because they had to find at least a little bit of middle ground.
Yeah, that was they were neutral in wars between France and
Yeah.
the English.
That is the what they listened to Washington in one respect
half
at
of
least.
Washington. They're so close to both. They just they shouldn't be they should be one like one day.
Okay, and then we have the Whiskey Rebellion. Woo! Whiskey. Okay, so Federalist. Let me read this for a second. What points I need to hit? I know this, but I need to see what points I need to hit. Okay, so basically, the Whiskey Rebellion. A lot of these farmers, they made their revenue off of making whiskey and everything. So whiskey was very important to their livelihoods because they made a living off of it. And Federalists leading Washington, so basically the Federalists, they were like, we need to impose laws and taxes and stuff that, we need to boost our economy a little bit. We need to make some more revenue for us as the federal government. So let's tax whiskey manufacturing and let's just put taxes on all like the whiskey imports, exports, whatever, so we can make a little bit of money off of it because it was like a big thing, being sold at the time. So if they're getting taxed a lot, then they could, make a little extra money. And these farmers, they were not happy with this because they're making all this money off of their whiskey, but this money is getting taken away from them with these taxes being implemented on their whiskey. So they were like, well, why are you guys doing that? We don't like that. You're taking the money that we're supposed to be making away from us, and now we're gonna be poor and broke and sad. So we're gonna rebel against you guys because that's not cool. So they basically, revolted a little bit, which resulted in we got a little violent because they want their money, they want their whiskey, and um, it kind of like just shows the way that like the Constitution, like they were able to use the Constitution and interpret it the way that they needed, that they thought was necessary in a way because this was the Federalists doing, and this angered the Democratic Republicans because they were like, yeah, this is like, I guess the Constitution, kind of technically lets you do that, but like you shouldn't be able to actually do that. So they got a little mad, and yeah,
Yeah. Eddie L, you are up for this one. Aliens edition. Mr. Eddie L.
bro,
Do you think he fell asleep?
I don't know.
All right. Well, in the meantime, I'll just fill in. The Alien Sedition Acts are imposed by the Adams administration, mainly for they say for the purpose of the safety of the Union, but really the Democratic Republicans get immigrants to the party. So, yeah, maybe half and half. It is kind of going with the increased tensions. Are kind of growing around America right now with wars. So yeah, no, basically it allows for enhanced like punishment and makes it harder for immigrants to kind of come into the Union, and it allows for them to be jailed easier. Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, these develop the idea of nullification that are against laws that are considered unconstitutional and unenforceable. Obviously, Virginia and Kentucky were against the Alien Sedition Acts, but this is important later. Nullification, obviously, for the nullification crisis and then the Civil War. I think this is also Eddie L. So, the developing. Oh, are you
I'm awake.
back?
I was
Like,
muted
we
by
decided to
accident and I
show
was talking and I didn't realize it.
Okay. You got that.
Yeah, I said that entire Alien Sedition acts and then I realized that I was muted.
Okay.
All right, anyways, American identity. So, so the overall establishment of the new American identity, it came with the abolishment of aristocracy, in which it was going more towards the overall people, or it was kind of going the American identity was starting to be centered and formed under like the overall working people, like the public as a whole, which isn't just the aristocrats. And then of course, this also came with like a period of religious toleration, in which many people were like, of course, with the influence of Enlightenment ideas, were more religiously tolerant, and like had like um less of a strict view on how they looked at other ethnicities and cultures. And then with this identity, there was also like new innovations in art, literature, and architecture, like with Charles William Peer, um, overall federal style architecture with Pierre, and then Hector St. John de Cravacho, and then oh shoot, I just said Pierre and didn't finish his name. Pierre Charles L'Enfant. Okay, and then of course with the new level of American identity came with differing ideas of liberty. The northern okay, so this is kind of like setting the framework, overall like baseline for the Civil War. Of course, the North mostly prioritized abolition or the abolishment of slavery. Yeah, because they looked at it at the more moral side, and they believed that African Americans and Black Americans and enslaved persons um, had the right to have liberty, as being born in the U.S. and all that, like everyone should be equal, no one should be left out. The South, however, because they were more closely like settled and had more reliance on their agricultural system and having an agriculturally based economy, slavery was a huge portion and was a huge necessity into developing and keeping that agricultural economy growing, especially with cotton and all that, right? So, yeah, basically, Northern um, prioritized abolition of slavery, um, morals, and all that, while the South, they mostly cared about agricultural development. Slavery was what brought all the money in. Yeah,
Mhm.
the North at the same time was also more industrial.
Mhm.
You know, um, yeah.
So yeah, abolition, it was still very early on, but it was developing. As for the art literature, Peel is going to be portraits of your very important founding fathers. Clevacar, I forget what the book was called, but it was kind of statement about how the American identity was. It talked a lot about it. He was originally from France. And then L'Enfant, he is the architect, the lead architect of Washington, D.C. And federal style architecture was kind of just a rejection of the British styles that they had been using previously.
Okay, Treaty of Green Battle. This is something small, but I wanted it to include it because of the emphasis of westward expansion. So the Battle of Fallen Timbers was between um not William Henry. It was one of the bigger generals we see in the the details of the battle aren't that important, but it's kind of marked the last battle of the Revolution. Before we see America colony break free from British Dominion, we see them want to westwardly expand, and that is prohibitive. But here, through the Treaty of Green Battle, we see the U.S. actually start the westward expansion, gaining Ohio, parts of Indiana, Illinois, and
Mm-hmm.
yes.
All right. We have the Northwest Ordinance of '87. This was created by the Articles of Confederation, or under the Articles of Confederation. And it was the process for admitting states in the U.S. So the territories could have governor, secretary, judges from Congress. They could kind of operate federally. And they had elected assemblies that are made of freeman populations of 5,000, and they got a delegate. And they once they had a constitution, or once they had a population of 60,000 people, they were allowed to make a constitution and apply to be a state. And there was also minor rights for state citizens. This is also how they were going about like adopting these like planning cities and stuff in the new territories. So how they were doing land distribution to individual parties versus what land was going to be held for the federal government.
Okay, and then we have these two treaties. Jay's Treaty was negotiated by John Jay between Great Britain and the US, and basically was to lessen tensions between the US and Great Britain over a lot of conflicts, which included the maritime conflicts that they were having at the time. And one thing was that for the British still had troops stationed in areas in North America in like their forts and stuff. So this treaty got them to withdraw their troops from the US, which was great. But this treaty also kind of neglected to address the original issue of impressment, which was the result. Well, that was one of the things in the big maritime conflicts that I had mentioned before. So it was like good, but then it kind of just forgot to, address a lot of things. And then there was um Pinicki's Treaty, which was between the US and Spain. And that was basically Spain being like, hey, let's sign a treaty and we will let you use New Orleans and Mississippi and the Mississippi River and the port and everything for all of your trade needs. Because we see you beefing with everyone else, so we don't want to deal with you, so let's have a nice little trade treaty. And um it established a border between US territory and Spanish territory, which was good. Then again, also opened the Mississippi River, and this treaty kind of settled US concerns over territory bounds and expansion. This kind of like quelled that urge to like expand for a bit, and it reduced conflict between the states and this area, especially because they were happy that they could, they could trade much easier now because that was a very um preferable region to be able to trade in because that port and that river very good for commerce.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
All right.
You think now would be a good place to stop, or?
No, I thought we're going all the way to Unit 5. We're going. Do you want to take a water break and get something?
Yeah, we could like take a good 5. Yeah.
Yeah. Un momento. In that case. Suppose. Are either of you two here, or are you two up?
Hmm?
Okay, you're still
Uh,
here. You're here.
Please, Speed, I need this.
Okay, Juno, are you here?
My mama kind of hopeless.
Let's see. Okay, Juno's gone.
I wouldn't be surprised if she's passed out.
Okay. Well, we'll wait for another minute or two, and then we'll. 2 hours 35 minutes, and then I'll just start reading out. Actually, I'll starting now. All right. Unit 4 starts in 1800 and ends 1848. The time period encompasses the Revolution of 1800 and the end of the Mexican-American War. The key concepts are the United States began to develop a modern democracy and celebrated a new national culture, while Americans sought to define the nation's democratic ideals and change their society and institutions to match them. Innovations in technology, agriculture, and commerce powerfully accelerated the American economy, precipitating profound changes to the U.S. society and to national and regional identities. The U.S. interest in increasing foreign trade and expanding its national borders shaped the nation's foreign policy and spurred government and private initiatives.
Right. I'm next. Right. So at the very beginning, the period starts with the election of 1800, right? So the candidates are on the Federalist Party, John Adams, and the Democratic Republican side, Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr. Sounds familiar. So Aaron Burr gained traction in the North, while Adams is mostly not as relevant as Burr is. Like Adams is kind of there, but he's kind of irrelevant, yeah. And then as a result, Jefferson and Burr tied. And then the Federalist Congress had to pick who would be, final choice. And then this kind of led to the Federalists endorsing Jefferson, more specifically with Alexander Hamilton. And then, with this, now it's also kind of known as the Revolution of 1800.
Yeah, profound changes with the election of Jefferson changed to Democratic Republican Party. So that is why it's Revolution of 1800. All right. Alice.
What? Oh, yeah, Louisiana Purchase. Okay, cool. So we got the Louisiana Purchase, which occurred. And it gave the US a great deal of land in North America. West of what they already had was honestly great for us. It was very cheap in perspective to how much land we actually got. And originally the US was just like, yeah, we just want to like purchase the area where the port of New Orleans is. But then Spain was like, why don't you just take the entire thing? So we were like, oh.
No, it was France.
Not Spain. What? Napoleon. That's not. Yeah, that is not. That is not Spain. France. They were like, why don't you take the whole thing? And we're like, okay, that's great. We can move westward now. So basically, they took that. They bought it. It was great for us. Though it did open a couple of little questions about what the heck we would be doing in this new territory where federal power would extend, what we would do with settlement, etc., what we would be doing for exploration, which led to things like, I'm blanking on the name, but that one exploration that was pretty cool.
Lewis and Clark.
Yep, Lewis and Clark.
And then
That
Zebulon
was
Pike
pretty
in the
cool. So they did that. And then also, because we got land a little westward of what we actually had before, the Adam-Onis Treaty was necessary in denoting a border between US's new territory and Texas and Spain or whatever. And then after this, Spain realized, oh my god, wow, they actually have a lot of territory now compared to like our little tiny bit of Oregon and Florida. We don't want conflict because we know they're probably gonna come after us next, given they already have this much territory, so we're just gonna like give it to them. So we got Oregon and Florida. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, so they dropped their claim on Oregon. Oregon's still claimed by the British too, so we'll kind of joint occupy that for
Yeah.
now. But yeah, we do get Florida officially here. Here we got the Barbary Wars. So pirates are ransoming American sailors in the Mediterranean. The Barbary is like a word to refer to North African pirates. Um, so it's called the Barbary Coast. United States goes to war. A kind of small American flotilla blocks Tripoli. So they do see success. USS Philadelphia runs aground and is burnt by Americans after the crew is captured, as to not let the Barbary pirates take the ship. It's a very nice ship, actually. Americans in the end do have to pay ransom for prisoners of war, and future ransom is discouraged but does still exist. Um, that is because they are pirates. They do not care about the treaty. They're going to break the law. They're criminals. I don't know what the plan was there, but it does show America does actually mean business. They're not gonna like let these national humiliations go without a fight. Even if they lose the fight, they're gonna fight, and I think that's something important, right?
Okay, the embargo and the non-intercourse act. So, and like we're facing all this crap, right? So we're facing the threats of the British and then the French, and it's very overwhelming for the United States. So here, TJ kind of enacts the Embargo Act. So that bans all foreign trade. So no imports, no exports were only within the country. This freaking decimates the United States economy. And so Thomas Jefferson's like, huh, we should probably do that or something about that. And so we go to the Non Intercourse Act. And so this is bans only on French and British trade. And then the states have to agree to the US like neutrality would have like trade lifted with
Yeah, I
so
should say trade ban, but yeah, sorry, it's my fault.
all good. And it's just basically TJ trying to be like, we're America, we're we're self-sustaining, and then they fall flat on their face.
We're a real country.
I'm a real country.
This
Right.
is
Eddie.
Next up, we got Tecumseh and the Battle of Tippecanoe. Right. All right. So, basically, it was between Native Americans, specifically the Shawnee tribe, led by the Shawnee brothers, and the Americans, led by General William Henry Harrison. You should remember that name for later.
yeah.
So, Harrison, right? He basically attacked Tecumseh's land, and Tecumseh launched launched an attack back. And because of his his inability to fight back, right? The alliance he had built with like other Native American tribes around him, they began to fall because he wasn't able to entirely structure himself well. So all of the other alliances he had set up, as a result, he wasn't able to, he wasn't strong enough going against the American side to hold on to them. And this led to him and his tribe joining the British in the Battle of 1812. Battle?
Battle. I should say war. It's fine. I think this is Eddie L. You again.
You get lead up to the War of 1812. You see, so there was some kind of I don't know Chesapeake Leopard affair, right? In which the USS Chesapeake and the HMS Leopard made contact. Pow. So the Leopard tries to take a British deserter and want to board the ship, but they eventually got denied by the Chesapeake. And then the British forcibly boarded the ship, resulting in the death of 3 Americans and 18 injured. And multiple sailors were impressed by the British. And then other events, of course, impressment. There were also Native American raids from Canada. Of course, Canada. Okay. And then also the Non-Intercourse Act, which, yeah.
Yeah, all of that was building tensions. Native American raids from Canada suspected to be encouraged by the British presence in Canada. They were like, "Hey, you should go attack those Americans. That'd be really awesome of you." Um, yeah, here we go. Is
So we got the War of 1812. And it was basically it occurred when the American war hawks encouraged war um with the British again, because if you thought we were out of conflict with the British, oh, you would be wrong, because we're back again. So basically, the Warhawks were this group of people that were like, yeah, we need to fight them, we need to fight them, we need to assert our dominance, and we're gonna do that by fighting them again and winning again. So they do that. Henry Clay is a very notable person among said Warhawks. It ends up being like a warfare or whatever. And the U.S. ends up, it's very good. We see quite a few victories over them. We did stop, kind of, sort of, into Montreal. It was, yeah. In the British in this process, burned down the White House. Not good. One of our losses in this. Obviously it was rebuilt, but it was burned pretty much completely. And eventually, to stop this, there was a few peace treaties that had to be signed, which included the Treaty of Ghent, which was a result out of Harvard Convention, if I'm not mistaken. And then the Battle of New Orleans, which is another, which is a major battle that occurred during this war. Everything in this war ended up being resolved. Yep.
Well,
Well,
Mm.
yeah, 'cause we didn't
Okay,
lose, but we didn't
the pieces treaty again just returned things to the status quo.
yeah.
Nothing
And
actually
I
changed.
see them.
Hartford Convention was the suicide of the Federalist Party. Not intended to be. They just kind of did on accident because they were like, "Hey, we should be nice to the British again and like stop this war. That'd be really awesome, guys." But the Treaty of Ghent was already signed, so peace was made. Um, Hartford Convention kind of sent that out. Both things arrived at the same time, and they're like, "Hey, these Federalists look kind of weird. I don't think I like them very much anymore." So huge like humiliation so bad for the Federalists that they did just kind of their party is gone. And then the Battle of New Orleans happens after the peace treaties reach America. It is a very very large American victory, inflicting thousands of British deaths with only 13 American casualties. So not even deaths, I don't think. But Andrew Jackson is the war hero of the battle, and he brings up bunches of different people. He's got some pirates. He's got some Native Americans. I believe he has some emancipated slaves with him too, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, he's got quite the troop with him.
So here we have one of the biggest examples of U.S. foreign policy. So James Monroe, he was our president once. Did you guys know that? Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So during his presidency, we have the Monroe Doctrine, and this allows for the protection of the South America countries from colonization from the Europeans. So basically, Big Boy America is like, we're gonna protect the South American countries, and you're not allowed to screw with them, or else we're gonna screw you up. And it basically was like the U.S. told the Europeans that they would stay out of affairs, and this happened up until the 1900s.
Yeah,
That's a later subject, though.
we did get involved in World War One. Had to make it a world
You
war.
don't spoil it.
Not
Don't
my
spoil it.
fault. Look, look. I'm too obsessed. Okay, my fault. All right, so we have the market revolution. After the end of the War of 1812, America saw glaring issues in infrastructure, and the era of good feelings and a general emergent American identity would lead to a culture of inventing on top of that. Both of these kind of go together, make the market revolution happen. So a bunch of the inventions. We have Eli Whitney. He makes the cotton gin that expands Southern slavery. He makes interchangeable parts. That creates the American system of manufacturing. It means that it means that you don't need skilled labor and artisans to make goods. So guns. This was originally created for guns. It was that if like one part of your gun broke, you could replace it with thousands of identical parts. And then you could use it for machines. You could use it for just random tools. You could use it kind of for everything. Then Robert Fulton, he makes the steamboat, which is very good for the canals that we're gonna be making. John Deere, he makes the steel plow, and then he gets a company named after him. Look at him go, look, old John Deere over there. Samuel Slater, he's British, but he brings over the idea of a factory, so he makes the first American factory. Then Cyrus McCormick makes the first mechanical reaper. John Deere, Cyrus McCormick with plow and reaper are going to be big in the west. Fulton, Steamboat, and the factories is going to be big in the north, and then yeah, cotton gin is southern. Governments, both state and federal governments, fund infrastructural developments. So Erie Canal, funded by New York, connects Buffalo to Buffalo, New York to Albany, New York. Yeah. And that's where the steamboat would be used. So that was very big for making New York a trade hub. B&O Railroad connects Baltimore to Ohio, and is the first railroad at all in America. Lancaster Turnpike is funded by the Pennsylvanian government, so the state government. And yeah, it's a road in Pennsylvania, around Lancaster. Actually, surprisingly enough, you wouldn't believe it. Then Cumberland Road it's a road funded by the federal government. It's a little more rare for roads, but they did in fact do that. Federal government also in part did the B&O Railroad, but state also was into that in like private ventures. Generally, the federal did not get a lot of infrastructural development for like the big things, but they did do a lot of smaller ventures. And like the later things they were very much into, but these like kind of revolutionary developments were usually by a state or private venture. And then sectionalism develops because of increasingly different economic structures and kind of anger that the North is benefiting more from a lot of these developments. As you can see, Erie Canal is in New York, B&O is Baltimore to Ohio, Lancaster and Cumberland are going to be near North still. Not one of those are for the South. And obviously, all these inventions are mostly West and North and not for the South. And the South is obviously becoming more reliant on slavery, and North is becoming more manufacturing, and then the West, in many ways, is still agricultural but not reliant on slavery.
Okay. Here we have the protective tariff of 1816 and then the subsequent panic of 1819. So after the War of 1812, America is America-centric. The average American wants American. So this tariff has a 20 to 25% tax. This helped our industry, our manufacturing industry, but severely hurt our farmers. Because of that, and because of the just overall tariff, we have the Panic of 1819, and this is America's first economic depression. Here we specifically see a major drop in cotton prices. We also see the second Bank of America fail, and then we have insane inflation in the economy. So we have a bunch of farm foreclosure, we have unemployment, increased sectionalism, which becomes as we go, and then the distrust in the national banks.
Mm-hmm. This is Eddie L.
Right. All right. Right. So evolutions in the political system. Like, all right. So basically, how the Republican system worked. The Federalists kind of transitioned into the Democratic Republicans, kind of like that. Or wait, did I?
No, sorry, I wrote it kind of weird. I'm saying the Republican system of government like works shown by the peaceful transfer of the Federalists to Democratic Republicans. It's my fault.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right. And then in this system, right, it was really set up by Marbury versus Madison, in which it basically enabled judicial review, right? And then John Marshall, over here, he increased the power of the Supreme Court by negating the Judiciary Act of 1789. Mm-hmm. and then basically gave the judicial branch more power. Right. And then McCulloch versus Maryland. Basically, the main thing you need to know about the ruling is that the federal law is the supreme law of the land. And then for expansion of voting rights, for the Panic of 1819, you're just gonna know that really big economic crisis throughout the nation. And then let's see, it encouraged universal suffrage. By universal, they meant like for all white men. And then this also came with the election of Andrew Jackson. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so just to say, Panic in 19 is there because obviously with the distrust in banks, a lot of people are also upset that they are not the ones who voted for the government that caused the panic. So they're like, hey, we want rights too. Also, like we want to be able to make sure that that doesn't happen again. Now there are future panics, so it's not completely effective, but it does expand voting rights.
Yeah. So speaking of Andrew Jackson, there was this big thing at the time regarding how much power should be split up between the states and the federal government. And Andrew Jackson, he was a little strange in this aspect because he was all like, well, what he said was that he definitely advocated for um states' rights and states' power, but his actions ended up kind of strengthening federal power, especially like executive power, like presidential, over the states, such as during the nullification crisis and the Tariff of Abominations and the Force Bill and everything. So during the nullification crisis, which was with, I want to say it was one of the Carolinas, but I'm probably
Yeah,
wrong.
it was SoCo. Good old SoCo.
Yes, South Carolina. They were trying to like nullify a federal thing, but Jackson was like, no, because I don't like it. So that definitely strengthened federal power over states' power because that was a display of, the states not having any power over the federal power and him using it against them. And there was the bank war and specie circulation, which again he used his power as the president to get what he wanted, which in turn, um, which was against the states. So that was an example of, that being against them. And also the Indian Removal Act, which included the Worcester v. Georgia case and the Black Hawk War, which he again used his executive power to do what he saw fit. But he did a couple of things that did follow his him advocating for states' rights, even though a lot of the things he did were kind of like them doing what he wanted and then them just turning out to fall under one or the other. And that was when he was resisting federally funded internal improvements because he didn't really think they were that important. He was like, yeah, it's wasting a lot of money. They need to do it themselves. So inherently, that would have contributed to the states having power because, to do it themselves, they need to have the power to do it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So bank war, he just vetoed the second national bank. And the specie circular was his system of pet banks, so smaller state banks. Indian Removal Act, Worcester v. Georgia. Supreme Court said that you couldn't do Indian removal, but then Jackson, struck back with the okay, well then enforce that. Now you'll notice he's the enforcement branch, so little funny prank by old Jackson there. And then the Black Hawk War was up in the northwest, not northwest like Oregon, but like the Midwest. Now it was the Sauk and Fox tribes were resisting being pushed off their lands. That's what the picture is. They went to a violent war with the Americans up there. All right. So there's the development of more American identity. Market revolution had a big effect on society, especially the classes. So the business elite still existed. Um, and that's a constant throughout history. Middle class. This is new. This kind of comes with industrial revolution. So obviously, America's market revolution was our kind of own industrial revolution. So we developed the cult of domesticity and separate gender spheres. This means that women are supposed to be the ones who work in the house, and men are the ones who go out and get jobs. It also develops cultures around theater and like recreation, which were not previously present, or it allows more people to enjoy that, whereas only the business elite really would have been able to do it before. There are also developments in the working class, which also existed prior. Obviously, like the constant is that there's always an elite and always the kind of working class. Middle class is the only new class, but working class sees both genders are still working to keep household afloat. That hasn't changed. Lots of immigrants are a part of the working class. Also, with these immigrants is a lot of nativist backlash from the American Party. We do get to that. I think that's in five though. There's also the Lowell Mill girls. They work in the textile industry in Lowell, Massachusetts. Um, Kind of starts off as a good way for them to bring money into their family. Conditions get bad and they end up kind of unionizing, but uh, they were still making money for their families, but they were working in like an actual industry and not at home with kids like they call it domesticity would have wanted. And also, domesticity is kind of the evolution of Republican motherhood. So other art and philosophy, we have the era of good feelings. It's just kind of in general going behind all this, but there's romanticism in art and literature. Kind of just making America look really nice. It's like Hudson River Art or Art College. I'm blanking on the actual name. It's similar to that though. Hudson River School of Art. They do like very nice paintings of landscapes. Architecture is Greek revival. This is done first of all because the Greece is obviously the birthplace of democracy, but also to kind of commemorate at the time Greece was in active revolution against the Ottoman Empire. Um, and then there's also transcendentalism in literature, much more natural, and says that like it's kind of inspired of romanticism, but it says that truth cannot be like perceived; it is just above your perception, and it kind of encourages like a transcendent view of the world. That's mostly in literature like Sleepy Hollow, though.
Okay. Branching off of the like in the United States, we also have social reforms and awakening. So this is a religious reform where we see a spread of democracy, romanticism. We see large conglomerates of different marginalized groups coming together, and then just a societal reform that brings to light different religions and the morality of everyone. Um, we see formations of utopian societies, big as the Oneida community in New York. And then our three reform movements are temperance, which is the abstinence from alcohol, abolition, which is slavery, and then the women's rights movement. We also see prison reform and mental health reform, the biggest person being Dorothea Dix, I think.
Yep.
Is that how you say it? It's Dix,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. This is the debates. Are we United States or are we United States? We have the development of a national culture. This would be the United States. There's the American system from Henry Clay, which is the infrastructural developments, protective tariffs to enhance manufacturing, and the Second Bank of the United States, two of which we get. Second Bank is vetoed by Jackson. This develops a kind of togetherness, though, even though it ends up actually increasing sectionalism in general. It is generally that we are America. We are the United States. We are a conglomerate. However, a lot of this, again, like we said, also goes into the development of sectionalism, which is regional culture. This is your United States. We are separate entities under kind of an alliance. This is built by Northern manufacturing versus Southern slave-based cash crop, but also Western food agriculture. Cash crop agriculture in the South is they all kind of rely on each other in a way, but they are very separate economies and they have different reliances. Obviously, the South is relying on slaves, the North and the West not so much. Slavery is also just in general a very big cause of sectionalism. You have the Missouri Compromise, where it was kind of said that slavery was not allowed over the 3630, except for Missouri. Missouri was allowed to be a slave state, but nothing more off to the west. You have white supremacy and positive good arguments in the South. This is the idea that the slaves were worse than white people. So like white people were kind of the top of society, and they also argued that slavery was a positive good not only for the economy of the South, but also because um, it gave like the African Americans a kind of chance at civilization. It's obviously both very racist points of view, but they were common in the South. Positive good specifically is from Calhoun. Um, Important to know. Then there is some resistance to slavery still. So we're still going. The continuities in covert. We're breaking tools, working slow, holding on to the African identities and culture. There's new overt, still the same kind of thing though. Rebellions. Nat Turner's. There's a just lots of terror around the Virginia countryside. Kills like a lot of people. But once again, it fails and leads only to harsher slave codes. The South becomes very deeply entrenched in slavery. In the North in abolition. And yeah, things aren't going well. It is not not going well at all. So then we get into Unit 5. So or that says Unit 4 still. Whoopsies. Unit 5 starts in 1844 and ends in 1877. The time period encompasses the election of 1844 and the end of Reconstruction. The key concepts are: the United States became more connected with the world, pursued an expansionist foreign policy in the Western Hemisphere, and emerged as the destination for many migrants from other countries. Intensified by expansion and deepening regional divisions, debate over slavery and other economic, cultural, and political issues led the nation into civil war. The Union victory in the Civil War and the contested Reconstruction of the South settled the issue of slavery and secession, but left unresolved many questions about the power of federal government and citizenship rights. So to start off, we got Commodore Matthew Perry. He goes out and opens Japan. He makes both an expedition to China and Japan. Japan though has been in isolation for quite a while. Tokugawa shogunate only allowed the Dutch to come to the port of Dejima a couple times a year, and that is the European contact for the Japanese. They get a little bit of trading, and that's that. Um, what Pat what God what Matthew Perry does, he brings a fleet of gunships, kind of sort of looking like this, and he tells Japan to open their borders to United States trade or else. You know, big gun in the subtext with that one. This is just a painting of what the Japanese, uh, kind of personified the ships as they're called the black ships. They were like kind of viewed as demons. But it did lead to the Treaty of Kanagawa, which opened trade relations, and the Meiji Restoration, which is more important later, but this is Japan's industrialization. Then there's also treaties with China, with the Treaty of Wangxia. That was it, right, Atlas? Okay, I'm getting airballed.
Oh,
Anyway,
it was Wangsha.
Wangxia, yeah. So yeah, they are
Also,
also establishing trade with China as well.
All right. So are polka dots back into season because James K. Polk gets elected. So his campaign promise, it's basically the 54-40 or fight of basically fighting for. Wait, what were they? No, no, they were fighting for the border. But what did it? Again?
It's fine. It's fine. Okay, they wanted the latitude line to be at the 5440 line,
Yeah,
like the
yeah, yeah,
Oregon
yeah,
Territory.
yeah, yeah. And then eventually they settled the border along the 49th parallel. Yeah, and then this also came with the concept of manifest destiny, usually proposed by John O'Sullivan, and it's the idea that okay, yeah, that Americans have basically the God-given right to expand across the entire continent. Yeah, and that that like America is or American institutions are, like it says, the best. And and this is usually also really supported by like other resources and like economic opportunity out west. And then this eventually spurs out the Mexican American War. which kind of happened or caused due to territorial disputes over Texas, right?
Yeah, over Texas
Yeah,
primarily.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And then eventually, okay, so basically, Texas like left to Mexico, but Mexico thought that like Texas was like still kind of like part of them, and like a situationship they got going on there.
Okay.
And then um, Texas went to America, and Mexico and America kind of started disputing based on that. Yeah, yeah. So yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah. So basically, yeah, Texas went to go dump their trauma on America, and then Mexico was like kind of sad that like, Texas left their side, so they both kind of like started bam, 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 yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. This is
Yeah.
crazy. I
Okay,
get
so then we get to the treaty that ended the Mexican-American War, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Hidalgo. So the main point is that it basically settled what was known as the Mexican Cession Land, and then it also made Mexico give up almost all of their like northern or not northern territory, but like yeah, basically all of their territory in North America, including regions of like Oregon, like California, and like
Mhm.
yeah, basically just like all of California and all that, and that's kind of leads to like events like the gold rush and all that that comes right after. But yeah, the main things is that U.S. gains a lot of land. And is this the one that settles the border at Rio Grande or?
Yeah, no, this it
Yeah.
settled the border along the Rio Grande as well, yeah. All right. So why do we want to go west other than manifest destiny? So in California, like like Eddie just talked about, there was gold discovered in 1848. So by 1849, we want to get that gold. There's also just a ton of land in California. Texas, it's literally just the land. We just really want the land. Oregon, it's still land. We really want that land. There's also a couple gold rushes, but mainly it's the land. So how do we get land? There's the preemption acts in kind of earlier on than the Homestead Acts, but the preemption say that 160 acres are very cheap. Yeah, you can pretty cheaply get that when as you go past the Mississippi. 1862, though, the Homestead Acts, they just give out that land for free. They're like, if you go past the Mississippi and you can find land that nobody else has, you can just have it. Like, go for it. Which is really great for the people who wanted that land out there. Um, and it also meant that there was a real reason for Americans to go out west because it was very barren, but now they could get quite a lot of farmland. This is Atlas. Atlas. Holy airball.
Okay. My phone is working. Okay, so we have the Oregon Trail. So basically, the U.S. they get a bunch of Western territory, and they're like, "Wow, what are we gonna do with all this Western territory? We're gonna live on it." And so basically, they need to take a bunch of people and to get them to settle out here at West. And how did they get them there? The Oregon Trail. So the Oregon Trail is basically when a bunch of people they migrated along this trail to the Oregon Territory. Big shocker. I know it's nothing like what the name suggests. So this trail, it's this big overland process. They took these wagons, they walked it long. Average trip there spanned about 200 miles. Took 5 to 6 months just for one trip. Um, the journey there generally horrible. People died, people got sick. The weather conditions were not good, not fun, very harsh. So that contributed a lot. So there was a lot of famine along the routes. People eating. Yeah. The
Donner
winters were
Party
rough.
reference.
Donner Party. To get stuck over the winters. And they gotta they gotta chow down. Okay. So everyone eventually made it west. Everyone that was gonna go. They make it there eventually. Led to increase in transportation because everyone is moving, everyone's moving along. Um, also influenced like the transcontinental railroad because they were like, we don't want to have to make this stupid trip by cattle wagon again. We need some freaking railroads that we can ride out here. So, yeah, they wanted to build those.
So
And then
awesome.
also, yeah, they explore there.
Woo! All right, then we got the Great Mormon Migration. This is so the Mormons were facing religious persecution due to specific religious beliefs. Mainly the belief of polygamy, like it just kind of being okay at all, which apparently not very popular. People really don't like that. Um, so they have to escape very very harsh laws. Like I mean, just I believe it was established around this time. You could kill somebody who was Mormon and really not face much punishment at all. Um, so obviously the Mormons were like, we got to get out of here. We need to leave like now. So Brigham Young, he led the Mormons on a couple different places, but eventually went all the way from Illinois to Utah. And they were seeking religious freedom, and they established a theocracy once they actually got to Utah. But the actual trail itself was 1,300 miles long, and it was kind of a parallel to the Oregon Trail. And it obviously very similarly had a large loss of life. It's about as dangerous as the Oregon Trail, a little less, but still same kind of dangers, especially when it came to Native Americans. Um, they often would raid and kind of attack the Mormons. But once they got to Utah, they made Salt Lake City and they established kind of a theocratic settlement there. Okay, then we have debates from westward expansion. Big chunky slide here. So the first thing, as people are westward expanding, they're making new space in the east for immigrants. So you have immigration. As populations, yeah, usually from Europe when they're in the east. So the Great Famine was happening in Ireland about this time. Lots of people are dying. Like Ireland is almost entirely reliant on potatoes as crop, and the potato crop fails. It's really bad. So lots of Irish immigrants are moving out to America. German unification kind of just happens. So Germans also just kind of increase in trying to find more land now because there's more social stability, which means there's less land kind of being thrown up all over the place. Both of these lead to increased nativism. This is specifically anti-Catholic, and it kind of emerges within anything or American Party, but it is against the immigration of especially like the Irish and the Germans, but really against all immigration, and it favors Native Americans as in people natively born to America, not actual like Native American people. Then there's the debates from expanding slavery west. The debate, especially like goes big because of the Mexican cession. There is one solution is the Wilmot Proviso. It is a free soiler. There's a free soiler party, and then the document is from the free soil party, and it is mainly on economic grounds. It is that in the Mexican cession, no slavery. Just that's it. It doesn't mean abolition in the South. It just means that we're not going to push it outwards. Abolition, slavery is immoral, gotta end now. That is the idea that we just gotta completely remove it. This is brought forth through the Underground Railroad, where slaves would escape up to the north. They just generally argue the immorality of, or there's actual like violence against pro-slavery people and just violence to kind of try to get rid of slavery, like through John Brown. The South, on the other hand, believed that they needed slavery to expand, both to protect their way of life and as well to protect their political party. This is because there was a balance of free and slave states, but if slavery stopped expanding, then it would give free states the majority and they'd be able to stop. On top of that, if their land ran out in the South, the way of life would have to expand west. This is also going back to Calhoun's positive good argument. This is Juno. 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 Okay.
Juno.
Actually airballed. That's fun. We got it for now. Okay. So there were some solutions for slavery. The idea in the South do nothing. They wanted to expand and continue as it had in the first place. They didn't really want anything to be done to stop it, obviously. Free soiler, restrict the growth of slavery. This is mainly concerning the Mexican cession land, but in general, also just to restrict it going north as well. Um, they they don't want it to end on moral grounds, but rather economic grounds. Missouri, there's another solution to expand the Missouri Compromise line out west. This is kind of supposed to be like an actual compromise, keeping slavery in the South out of the North, just continuing it west, which is kind of implied by the Missouri Compromise already. So, it's just kind of like, let's just keep on with this. Popular sovereignty, not originally made by Stephen Douglas, but championed by him later. The idea that a territory and later a state just gets to choose whether or not they want slavery, um, which would generally promote slavery in that, like, slave owners could just move to new lands, vote for it, and they have it. The abolitionist final solution just end slavery. Again, UGRR, and then Liberator and North Star by William Lloyd Garrison and Frederick Douglass, respectively, arguing the immorality of slavery for the abolition of it, too. June's still gone, I think. All right, yep. So, Compromise of 1850, California is admitted as there's a couple different parts to it. So, first, California admitted as a free state. Second, remainder of the Mexican cession is divided into New Mexico and Utah territories. These are going to use popular sovereignty. 3. Washington, D.C. would abolish slave trade. Like we said earlier, states abolished it in 1808, but territories did not. So now, officially, you could not go 2 blocks from the Capitol and buy a slave. That's, great for them, finally getting that settled. Um, the fourth and most controversial, a stricter fugitive slave law. This law would allow, it would make it so that escaped slaves could not just go to the North for refuge. It required that Northerners would have to help capture refugees, and it treated escaped slaves like criminals, making it illegal to protect them, and requiring Americans to aid in their capture and return to the South without a trial. So it made it a lot harder to have slaves get out into freedom. Um, which meant that the UGRR really expanded up to Canada at that point. Um, but it also just meant that it was harder for slaves to escape in general. It reduced the amount that it could happen. And then we have Kansas, Nebraska Act and Bleeding Kansas. Kansas, Nebraska allowed the two territories to use popular sovereignty. This angers the Missouri Compromise because it says no more slavery up past Missouri. What are we doing here? You can't even decide this. No, this is free. Nebraska is expected to be free, and Kansas is expected to be a slave state. But we have Bleeding Kansas because it's based on a vote. Settlers from nearby states and some special extremists, John Brown, being really the main one there, they moved to Kansas to fight in a literal sense for a free Kansas. They physically, like, and actively fight with guns to try to remove the pro-slavery sentiment in the territory. They also are casting illegal votes to try to make it so that both of these are free. It is incredibly violent, and it grabs the attention of the entire country. And there's a huge increase in sectionalism because there's physical, like, violence now happening because of these debates. Um, then we have Dred Scott v. Sanford, another huge stinker here.
All right. Right, Dred Scott v. Sanford. So the overall case is that a slave owner, Sanford, lived for years in the North, and then Dred Scott, a runaway slave or freed slave, sued for his freedom, having been brought with him. So then, Roger Taney was the judge, right?
Yeah, Tawny was
Yeah, judge. Yeah, yeah. So he believed that slaves being property could not legally sue a citizen of the U.S. Being Sanford, slave owner. Furthermore, slaves couldn't be freed just by being brought to a free state, because of course they're being brought with their owner, right? And then essentially, Taney legalized slavery across the nation, as nothing could hypothetically stop a plantation owner from the South moving north and keeping all of his slaves. And then this basically led to slaves being deprived of like further rights and like the advancement of being more free, kind of.
Mm.
And it also declared the Missouri Compromise unconstitutional. If we remember, the Missouri Compromise was where it basically established a certain border or line to where above it would be free states, and below it would be the slave states. So because slave owners, if they could just bring their slaves to the north from the south, and still have control and authority over those slaves, then it doesn't really make you know it just makes it
Yeah.
unconstitutional. It just makes
Yeah.
the Missouri Compromise void.
Yeah,
Just to
it wasn't
absolve.
even it wasn't even just void. Like he straight up also mentioned the Missouri Compromise. Said this is also unconstitutional, despite already kind of voiding it with his earlier opinion. He really was a huge win for the Southerners and a huge loss for literally everybody else.
Yeah.
Is this your font? I honestly
Uh,
can't tell. I think it is. Yeah.
oh yeah, this is mine. Yeah. And then came the election of 1860. This was a third-party system which started completely sectional, right? The Republicans were in the North. They had a free soil position, and the Democrats were in the South and wanted to expand slavery. Kind of reverse from today, if you think about it. So, oh shoot! Oh wait, I can't say that.
It's fine.
Oh man. Republicans nominate Abraham Lincoln. Uh, yeah. Okay. So yeah, the Republicans nominated Abraham Lincoln, and then the Democrats send three different nominees, right? So Lincoln isn't on the Southern ballots, yet he won in a landslide. And then South Carolina seceded, followed by just the rest of the South in the coming weeks. And then there's also Alexander Stephens' cornerstone speech, in which it portrays the ideas of white supremacy and the good of slavery in Southern society in the new Confederate States of America, the kind of Confederacy. Can I do the Civil War, or do you want to?
I mean, do you if you want to share parts of it, I did put it all in one.
Yeah, I
Um,
guess.
do you want me to like start us off and then, or do you want to do like draft riots and stuff?
Um, you could just start it off, or you could,
All
yeah.
right. Yeah. So, Civil War starts in 61, goes to 65. The advantages: North has a population and infrastructural advantage. The South has a culture of military, and they have a better reason to win because I mean the North is trying to stop the it's a unionist idea from Lincoln, and it's just trying to stop secession. But a lot of the public opinion in the North is, well, we don't like them anyway. Let them secede. Whereas the South, they are fighting, like they in their eyes, they are fighting for their right to like hold slaves. They're fighting for their constitutional right. Um, so they have that earlier kind of reason that they want to win. So that means their morale is automatically higher. The war is a total war. That means the whole population is going to be working towards the outcome of the war. This leads to the first draft laws. The first ones start in the Confederacy, but then the North also gets them. Problem: the laws are incredibly unfair. Rich people can buy their way out of it. The Confederacy, it's basically if you have slaves, like a certain number of slaves, you just aren't going to be in the draft. So if you're rich and plantation owning, you're not in the draft. North is you can just buy your way out of the riot, or not the riot, the draft. So if you're rich, you just don't have to fight. This leads to the draft riots in New York City, especially, and the sentiment that the Civil War was a rich man's war but a poor man's fight, because a lot of the poorer people did not really care one way or another, because especially in the North, because again there wasn't really a morale reason for the North to win. They honestly kind of wanted the South gone anyway. Whereas so that, I mean, that was the opinion among the poor people, but then rich people didn't have to fight in the war, and a lot of them were the ones who actually were caring, like members of Congress. Um, I'll go on Fort Sumter, and then you can take from Antietam if you want.
Yeah, sure. Also,
Okay. Yeah, so Fort Sumter starts the war. This is when it's a in Charleston Harbor. It's a federal fort, and there were federal troops within the fort for about I think 2 months before a humanitarian aid ship arrived to resupply them. A humanitarian aid was especially chosen as to try to say, hey South, hey Confederates, we're not trying to go to war. We're just trying to feed the troops in this fort. However, the South fires upon the fort, still just taking it as a sign of aggression anyway, and they are actually the first aggressors to the Civil War, with the first victory be going towards the Confederates at the siege of Fort Sumter, where after I believe 2 extra months, it's not 2 months, it's only a few, I think it's 2 days. Um, the I'm blanking so hard. The federal troops are forced to surrender. Whereas the South just wins the battle.
All right. All right, and then
Yeah.
so yeah, there were also the okay. You want me to just do the rest? Or?
Yeah, you can start at Antietam and go the rest of the way down.
Okay. And then with this there was also the Battle of Antietam and Gettysburg. So yeah, so Antietam was known as one of the single most bloodiest days in American military history. About 22,000 soldiers were dead, and it kind of marked a turning point for the Union as it like halted the Confederate invasion of the North and gave Abraham Lincoln kind of a more opportunity to deliver the Emancipation Proclamation. And then with the Battle of Gettysburg, it had also marked a turning point in the war because of its impact on Southern morale and their military strategy overall. And it had over 51,000 deaths, making it one of the deadliest battles in U.S. history. And let's see, and then of course, later led to the Gettysburg Address, in which where Lincoln gave a speech addressing both in order to boost the morale for the Union and the Union Army, and at the same time honoring the soldiers, which at the same time also boosted the morale for the Union Army. And then let's see,
Anaconda Plan.
yeah, Anaconda Plan. Yeah, so the Anaconda Plan was basically like a military strategy proposed by Union General Winfield Scott during the early stages of the Civil War. So the overall goal was to suppress the Confederacy with naval blockade of the southern ports and also controlling the Mississippi River, which would have like strongly um, uh, limited and basically strangled the South's economy, since the Mississippi River is like one of the main access points in order to like feed it into farms and fields of crops and all that, which is what the South's economy is based on. Let's see. What?
Vicksburg. I can take Vicksburg if you don't have it on.
Yeah, sure. You can do Vicksburg if you want.
Vicksburg, the siege of Vicksburg, basically it ended. It was a 2 month siege led by Grant, I believe. Yeah, I think it was still Grant at that point. He takes the city, and that is the kind of final bastion that's holding the Confederacy to the Mississippi River. After the battle, the the Union has control of Mississippi, which allows them to kind of split the Confederates into two separate sections, with Texas on the, you know, not Texas only, I don't think, but they generally they had it split in two along the Mississippi. And do you want to do the rest from here? Do you know it all?
Uh, for like the rest, like the other slide, or like the
For
rest, as in
just
like
the
the
rest of
slide.
Grant's Total War surrender
It's for like the aftermath and everything.
for Civil War.
Oh, for civil. Oh, okay. Oh, just
Do you
wait.
know
So
Grant's
for
Total War?
this slide or for
I can just I got it. Okay, so
no, because I can do it, but like, do you like?
I'm just asking if you know Grant's Total War and Surrender of Lee, and you want to do them.
Uh, yeah. I guess I kind of get it to the point.
Well, I mean, do
Yeah.
you or do you not? Just I can just do it.
Okay. If you want to do it, you can
Okay,
do it. Okay.
then
Okay.
okay. Grant's Total War. Okay, Grant's Total War is his idea is that the best way to fight the Confederacy is to strike at the citizens of the Confederacy, not necessarily go for their army, but go for their backbone. Now he doesn't directly really do this, but his kind of good old pal, William Tecumseh Sherman, he does do this. So during Sherman's March to the Sea, Sherman marches all the way from Atlanta, having just burnt the entire place to the ground, really, all the way to Savannah, which is from kind of the center of Georgia to the coast of Georgia, with a huge path of like a burnt path, burnt houses. It really just strikes at the will of the Confederacy and its citizens, which means, I mean, their morale is absolutely destroyed after this. And really, this is kind of one of the big things that leads to the surrender of Lee at Appomattox Courthouse up in Virginia. In the end, so the North was a unionist at the start, but it turned into an abolitionist cause. So the end of slavery is definitely the goal by the end of the war, which is also where they got a lot of their morale boost and where the war kind of turned around for the Union. It's when they had the reason to fight, which was for the end of slavery. Um, do you want to do this or do you want me to? I can definitely do it.
Fine. We could do half and half again. Like I could start it off if you want.
Okay, yeah, you start it off, and then I can take over. How about you go to Lincoln? No, I'll take over.
All right, all right. So basically aftermath of the Civil War. So the North and South reunited. Hugs and joy. Uh, kinda, not really. So basically, the radical Republicans in the North still wanted to punish the South for basically seceding from the Union and other things with slavery. The whole shebang. So but yeah, so it wasn't all great. Like even though they were like conjoined, they weren't really still on good terms yet. And then they also had different because of this they had different plans for reconstruction, right? Like they had the 10% plan and also the Wade Davis bill, in which the 10% plan it was proposed by Abraham Lincoln. It aimed to kind of reintegrate the southern states into the Union by allowing a new state government to be formed if at least 10% of the voters in the state took an oath of allegiance to the Union. And then the Wade Davis bill was basically a proposal for the reconstruction of the South by imposing stricter requirements on southern states for rejoining the Union. And then shortly after this, let's see, just assassination of Abraham Lincoln. April 14th, 1865, I think. Abraham Lincoln, he was in Ford's Theater, and all of a sudden, John Wilkes Booth, right, comes behind him and then shoots him right under his ear, killing him instantly. Headshot, yeah. And then, let's see. And then and then after his death, Andrew Johnson had took over the Reconstruction, and he messed it up a bit to a point where he got impeached. And then you wanna
Yeah. No, yeah. So Johnson took over the Reconstruction, and he was a slave-owning Southerner. He was originally brought on as vice president strictly to get votes from the South. Obviously, the South never got the votes there because Lincoln was not on a ballot in the South. But he wanted the Reconstruction done quick. In his head, I mean, the South was fine. He was again a part. He was a Southerner, so he was very, very, very lenient on the South, even more so than Abraham Lincoln was. And he really wanted the South to just rebuild itself how it wanted rather than the federal government to rebuild it. So he was very quickly done with Reconstruction. The Republicans all disagreed with him, mainly because there's the Black Codes and there's Confederates in Congress. There's the existence of terrorist groups like the KKK. This is not Reconstruction very clearly in their heads. This is like you can't just like leave this. There's very clearly issues. To kind of aid this, the Republicans established the Freedmen's Bureau, and in general, well, okay, Freedmen's Bureau, it is for education and in generally to help the newly emancipated African Americans of the southern United States. But in general, the Republicans do kind of do their own thing with the Reconstruction because they have a two-thirds majority in Congress. This means that they can reverse any veto made by Johnson. So Johnson can veto all he wants, and Congress can veto all they want. So yeah, they kind of there's a power struggle between how the Reconstruction should be done between the executive branch and the legislative branch. What do we have here? Yeah. Um, I think there's one more slide after this. If you want to take that one, and then I can take this one.
uh yeah, if you want to do that, yeah.
Okay. So, early Reconstruction, new amendments to the Constitution. The 13th Amendment abolishes slavery. 14th, it establishes the law of soil. That means anybody born on American soil is an American citizen, and it requires states to protect the rights of all citizens. So, in essence, it basically protects everybody born on American soil. The 15th Amendment, it's black male suffrage. It means that all males can now vote. Women's suffrage activists kind of oppose the ratification of the 15th. They're a little bit concerned that with the ratification of the 15th Amendment, because it does not mention women, they aren't against it as like they obviously want more voting suffrage for everybody, but the issue is that they are in fear that women's rights will be ignored, which I mean they are kind of right in that they are until the 1920s then. So they it's not an unfounded fear, but obviously there is a bit of is a little bit counterintuitive because I mean you have activists like Frederick Douglass who were supporters of women's suffrage, and yeah, he actually did advocate that hopefully with the extension of black male suffrage, women's suffrage would follow shortly after. In general, Republican Congress takes control of the Reconstruction. Eventually, they do try to impeach Johnson, but they miss by one Senate vote. Now, technically, it's based on his violation of the Tenure of Office Act, but in reality, they mostly just wanted a reason to remove him because he was an obstacle. And they also create the Military Reconstruction Act, which means that any state that is not into the Union yet will be separated into 5 military districts. These are harsh districts. They aim to make sure that the Reconstruction is being followed correctly. Um, and in many ways, it is relatively successful. They do get the South kind of into the Union correctly. And while it's there, there is a reduction in the amount of violent acts towards African Americans. Not that it isn't there, but there is a reduction in it. And that will last. That I think that starts in the early, let's see, yeah, it'd be like 1868 kind of ish zone. You want to do?
Right. Now, so why exactly did the Reconstruction fail? So, firstly, the lands were distributed to the newly emancipated, right? And then Johnson, who got impeached, revoked this, and then there's also the South's use of sharecropping, in which it's where landowners allowed tenants to use their land in exchange for a share of crops produced. Right, so that also didn't really help out a lot. And then there was also the erosion of black civil rights, which, although you know, basically that enslaved African Americans were freed, they still didn't have as many civil rights as white people in society had. As seen with like the black codes and like other things such as the Jim Crow laws, right? Yeah, everything that's already been mentioned. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and then let's see this. There was also like a bunch of like slaughterhouse cases. Also, the U.S. versus Cruikshank case, in which courts restricted the protection of civil rights for Black Americans, and in turn, this encouraged the rise of the Ku Klux Klan or the KKK.
Mm-hmm.
Basically just uh, widespread American social club based on hate and white supremacy towards Black Americans. All that, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you want to talk about the panic?
Oh yeah, I can do that. I can finish it off. So the Panic of 1873, it was just it was, again, just kind of a normal economic panic, but the in general it reduced the Republican fervor to continue the Reconstruction federally. They know, I mean, they were kind of like starting to lose money in their own states, and they were just busier with now the economic reasons. So they still continued it for a few years, but they weren't like excited. They weren't like anxious to be reconstructing. So with the Compromise of 1877, the Democratic nominee for for the election of 1876 is Tilden right here. He is winning the election, but there are still uncounted electoral votes. So the compromise is basically they just said, if you end the Reconstruction, withdraw the federal troops from the South, then Rutherford B. Hayes can become the president. We'll give him all of the remaining electoral votes, which would have put him one above. So basically, they were saying remove federal troops, and Hayes can be president, which was accepted by the Republicans in Congress. So Hayes would become the president of the United States, but it has now ended Reconstruction officially. And that is the end of Unit 5. So now we got
Right.
Confetti 1, Confetti 2, Confetti 3. Oh,
There's
Confetti
7 or
4.
6 confetti to this point. Yeah.
The end.
Anyways, I'll see you guys later. I'm gonna go drop off.
Yep.
See ya.
Okay. It would seem as though we have lost the other two as well. But congratulations on making it to the end here, and thank you. Good luck on your midterm.
Yeah. And I'm just
Bye-bye.
saying, if you raw dogged this entire video, what is wrong with you?
That's so.
Anyways,
Thank you,
see you.
Eddie. Bye bye.